Whether you're pursuing a one-year master's or diving into research, Haifa gives you the tools, mentorship, and real-life insight to make your mark on the world. Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience.
When you buy from Blessed by Israel, you're not just shopping, you're standing with the families of Israel's heartland. Every bottle of delicious olive oil, handcrafted necklace, or jar of honey carries the spirit of Judea and Samaria. These, along with many more products, are the tastes, scents, and stories of the Promised Land, made by people rebuilding our biblical homeland every day. Shop now at blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL for 10% off on your first order.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Kalev Ben David, coming to you live from Israel, bringing you all of the biggest headlines from across the region. Well, it's 2 p.m. in Israel, it's 8 a.m. in New York City, and this is day 24 of the Iran war. And let's take a look at the latest developments. In a breaking news development and still developing story, U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and Iran are now engaged in talks to end the war, and he has ordered a delay in planned attacks on Iran's power infrastructure. Trump tweeted on his Truth Social account just in the past hour, "I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions." However, sources in Iran immediately replied, denying President Trump's claims, saying, in fact, there are no such talks being conducted. Now, this news comes after power cuts were reported in Tehran earlier today, as Israel launches waves of airstrikes targeting infrastructure in the Iranian capital. Residents reported widespread blackouts across Tehran following those heavy airstrikes this morning. Israel's military confirmed it had targeted infrastructure in the capital, but did not provide further details. Iranian media reported explosions across the city, followed by power outages across Tehran. Now, those strikes come amid escalating tensions following threats between the U.S. and Iran over potential attacks on civilian infrastructure. Now, while visiting the site of this weekend's missile impact site in the southern city of Arad, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Iran threatens the entire world, and it was time for the allies to step up and confront the terrorist regime in Tehran.
They fired an intercontinental ballistic missile on Diego Garcia. That's 4,000 kilometers. I've been warning all the time. They have now the capacity to reach deep into Europe. They already have fired on a European country, Cyprus. They are putting everyone in their sights. And fourth, they're stopping a maritime international route, energy route, and trying to blackmail the entire world. What more proof do you need that this regime that threatens the entire world has to be stopped? Israel and the United States are working together for the entire world. And it's time to see the leaders of the rest of the countries join up. I'm happy to say that I can see some of them beginning to move in that direction, but more is needed. President Trump's call to have the international community confront this terrorist fanatic regime of zealots, that is a call not only for the security of America and the security of Israel, it's for the security of the entire world. And it's time for them to act.
Well, for more, let's go to our Mayan Hoffman, who is out in the Tel Aviv area. And Mayan, some dramatic news just in the last hour. We have seen a kind of drop in the rocket attacks. It does seem over the past 24 hours. And I think people are going to start to wonder if this is connected to those developments. What's the latest?
Well, as you mentioned, Kalev, it's good news for Israel and bad news at the same time, right? We're hearing from Trump that he is in negotiations with Iran, and that could lead to a ceasefire at some point, the end of hostilities. He's saying they're not going to attack the energy infrastructure for 5 days. Of course, Iran is saying that that is incorrect, that no negotiations are going on. Well, here on the home front, it has been relatively quiet for the last 24 hours. Certainly, there were some sirens overnight in the north, in the south, and central Israel, and even this morning in Jerusalem as well. But those rockets were all intercepted. There were no injuries reported and very small amounts of shrapnel that dropped down into the country. This obviously makes people start to feel a little bit safe. Whether or not it's tied to the news or not, it's probably too early to tell. But I can tell you this, that here on the home front, after having going through now into our 4th week of the war, people are getting tired of running back to and forth to shelters. Most of the schools are still closed, and people celebrated Purim under rocket fire and in shelters. Certainly, there's a hope with Passover starting the night of April 1st that potentially, if the Trump information is correct, and that we'll be able to have a period of quiet, at least, that perhaps Pesach will be able to be celebrated with a little bit more festivities.
Yes, well, a lot we have to still learn about this situation, Mayan. Let me just follow up on those terrible strikes on Dimona and Arad over the week, the past few days. Several people, many dozens of people injured. Do we have latest on the condition of those people?
Yeah, we do. We have known now from the health ministry that around 4,700 people have already been hospitalized since the start of this war. And as you mentioned, from Dimona and Arad, there were more than 100. At this point, there are 15 people still in hospital in serious condition from the series of attacks. But the majority of the Israelis have left the hospital. There's about 80 in total that are still being hospitalized, other ones in moderate or light condition. In reality, those 2 strikes, and it's important to mention this, that happened in Dimona and Arad, there were only 4 strikes that actually struck down directly in the state of Israel, meaning that the interception rate is around 95%. If you recall, the first night in Tel Aviv, the second day in Beit Shemesh, that Beit Shemesh one, the first night we lost 1 person. Beit Shemesh was quite deadly with 9 people killed. And in Arad and Dimona, we didn't see people killed, but we certainly saw quite a number of serious injuries, including some children in that attack. But it's important to remember to go to the shelters. And one of the things that happens in these periods of what we call relative quiet, right, where we only have some sirens, we're not seeing a lot of damage, as people get lackadaisical and forget to go to the shelters. So it's a message from the Home Front Command to please follow the directives. This morning when the siren went off in Jerusalem, I was actually in the Jerusalem Mall, I've now mentioned, in the center, and many people chose not to go down to the shelter. It's not a smart move. Shrapnel from these cluster bombs can fall at any time, not as deadly, but certainly very likely to damage and injure. So shelters are still important, even in periods of relative quiet.
Right. And people should not let their guard down no matter what they're hearing in the news. That's for sure. Mayan Hoffman out there in the field in the Tel Aviv area. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, if a deal with Iran should not materialize in the coming days, reports say the U.S. is preparing a weeks-long military operation to force Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump, of course, had given Iran 48 hours to reopen the strait or face strikes on its energy infrastructure. That now has been delayed. Iran says it will retaliate to any attack on its electricity sector by targeting Israel's power plants, as well as infrastructure supplying U.S. bases with electricity in the region. Now, the Strait of Hormuz carries about 20% of the world's oil and gas. Its closure has already pushed Brent crude to over $110 a barrel, though that price has now dropped in the last hour on this latest news by Trump. U.S. officials have told Israel that any operation to reopen the strait could take weeks and that the war may be extended to allow time for that campaign. Washington saying it will not allow Iran to hold a critical global shipping route hostage, with pressure aimed at weakening the regime from within. Sources also say the U.S. considering a possible ground operation to seize Iran's Karg Island, which is the country's main oil export hub, handling about 90% of Iran's crude shipments. thousands of U.S. Marines and Navy personnel are deploying to the region, including the U.S. Boxer amphibious group. Officials warn military action may be required to ensure freedom of navigation. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, says that the allies are organizing an effort to ensure the Strait of Hormuz is opened, but he stops short of backing any direct military action to reopen the waterway.
Well, let me first of all say that I know there is a lot of debate in the US and in Europe whether this campaign of the president against Iran was necessary. And let me tell you, it is. It is crucial that the US is doing this. I know the president was angry because he feels that European and other allies have been too slow. The good news here is that since Thursday, a group of 22 countries, most of them from NATO, but also Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the UAE and Bahrain, most of the other countries from NATO, coming together to implement his vision of making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is free, is opening up as soon as that is possible.
And on the northern front, the IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir has approved plans to deepen the ground offensive in southern Lebanon, telling Hezbollah it made a grave mistake by joining the war and remaining a central proxy of Iran. Zamir says the fight against Hezbollah has only just begun, warning the group would be left isolated after the war with Iran. And since Hezbollah entered the war, the IDF has struck more than 2,000 targets in Lebanon, including rocket launches and weapons depot, eliminating hundreds of Hezbollah operatives. Now, Air Force strikes on bridges and supply routes along the Litani River are aiming to disrupt the flow of weapons southwards. Ground forces have also carried out raids and targeted killings, expanding the buffer zone. Overnight, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Qasemiya Bridge over Lebanon's Litani River, saying Hezbollah used it to move weapons and operatives into the south. Here's Defense Minister Israel Katz on IDF operations in Lebanon.
ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו ואני הורינו לצה"ל להשמיד באופן מיידי את כל הקשרים מעל לנהר הליטני שמשמשים לפעילות טרור. וזאת כדי למנוע מעבר של מחבלי חיזבאללה ונשק דרומה, ובנוסף לכך להאיץ את הרס הבתים הלבנונים בכפרי המגע כדי לסכל איומים על היישובים הישראלים בהתאם למודל בית חנון ורפיח בעזה.
And staying focused on the northern front, an IDF investigation has concluded that Ofer Moskowitz, the 60-year-old resident of Kibbutz Mizgav Am, who was killed near the Lebanese border on Sunday morning, died as a result of a misfired Israeli artillery shelling and not by a Hezbollah rocket as was originally thought. Now, the IDF says the artillery fire in the area was intended to assist Israeli troops operating across the Lebanese border, but several of the shells fell short of their target, killing Moskowitz. The IDF said it found several severe issues and operational errors in the incident. It apologized to the family of Moskowitz and said it would continue its investigation and draw the necessary conclusions when it was completed. Now, due to the ongoing security situation, Israel has now cut Ben Gurion airport traffic to just one flight per hour and slashed passenger limits. Transportation Minister Miri Regev and senior officials have ordered further restrictions at Ben Gurion, reducing outbound passengers from 120 to just 50 per flight and cutting overall flight activity. The new measures took effect overnight, allowing only one departing flight and one arriving flight per hour. Now, the move follows earlier restrictions after interception debris damaged aircraft last week, and it comes as the airport continues to operate under strict security protocols. Arkia Airlines says it will shift most of its operations out to Aqaba, Jordan, and to Taba, Egypt for such destinations as New York, Bangkok, and Hanoi, while maintaining some limited flights from Ben Gurion Airport. El Al is reviewing a reduced schedule and calling for Ramon Airport near Eilat to help relieve pressure. Aviation officials warn many travelers may not be able to fly during the holiday period. Well, joining us for more on all of these issues is Ambassador Danny Ayalon, who's the former Israeli ambassador to the United States and now the chairman of Silver Road Capital. From London, we have Arel Tobelem. He's the director of research at the Forum for Foreign Relations. Ambassador Ayalon, I have to start with you on this dramatic breaking news. President Trump claiming there are ongoing talks with Iran that are productive to the point where he's delaying attacks on Iranian infrastructure. What do you make of this?
Well, since the Iranians deny any initiation of talks, I must believe them. I think that we see also the result of this tweet that you mentioned of the president, which already brought oil prices down and also stopped any, I would say, discounts on stocks and shares in the United States. So there is a purpose here, I believe. And with Trump's tweeting, I think it's mostly to allay any fears in the markets, the energy markets, and also the stock market. And the fact that he postpones it for 5 days means that he can always come back to it. So when it comes to Trump, he can say something and the opposite at the same time. It's also a tactic to confuse his enemies, and he confused here not just foes, but also friends. But I believe that the operation will continue, and this ultimatum that was extended by 5 days relates only to the energy installations of Iran.
Okay, Aurel, that also raises the question, though, is it the Trump is he just not saying the truth when he says there are talks with Iran, or is there a possibility that there are some talks with some elements in Iran or connected with Iran, and that is maybe the basis of what he's saying?
Thank you, Kenneth. So there are two ways that I would say we can interpret this. We can either interpret it through the skepticism or through the technical explanations. I think it's important first to clarify the context in which this is happening. So according to a recent report by Politico, 3 countries, including Vietnam, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, are going to run out of oil in the next 3 weeks. Natural gas supplies are already dwindling across European countries, and China is now refusing to export fuel in an effort to preserve its own fuel supplies. So Trump is contending with a pretty irritated market. The Strait of Hormuz is also blocked. Iran has begun mining the waters, I believe, as of mid-March in the Strait of Hormuz, which is going to make navigation, even should it be opened, much more difficult. Trump is trying to allay fears. It's clear in the timing. He announces this 2 hours before markets open, and 5 days is just enough to get to market close towards the end of the week. One thing, though, is that's being overlooked and is consistently overlooked is what this means for China. We know that hundreds of Chinese military engineers were trapped in underground facilities in Iran at the beginning of this war. Many of them are presumed dead. Actually, most of them are presumed dead. Correction. And China is going to have very little incentive to continue to provide technical and military expertise and weaponry to Iran, especially anything resembling a resupply, which it facilitated for the Iranians following the deterioration of their military installations and other facilities in June of 2025. So that Iran has lost the financial and military cushion that it is being provided and has been provided by China may be providing additional motive for Trump to establish talks. It's important to note as well that given the deterioration of the regime, it's very unclear with who Trump is talking. He might very well have been talking with certain elements of the IRGC, but the degree of operational control that they are likely to have over Iran and the continuing war effort is minimal, if anything. So I don't believe that this is genuine. I think it's a hiatus in what otherwise is going to be a continuing and prolonged war effort. And the Iranians have clearly refuted any agreement to negotiations with Trump, and I believe that they will continue to do so.
Ambassador Danny, I have to go back to your point, even if, as you say, that this is more of a tactic by Trump. It only kind of delays the inevitable. Or is there more to it? Is President Trump signaling to the Iranians that he's now more willing to talk, maybe even more in their terms than he was in the past, or to get mediators a chance to talk? In order to bring around some end to some off ramp for the conflict that he wasn't willing to take, perhaps earlier in the war.
Well, Caleb, there's no doubt in my mind that Trump would like to end this war, but he has to end it on his terms. Otherwise, he will be the ridicule of the entire American political scene and even beyond. Hurting also American strategic position worldwide and certainly in the region. Now, what could be on his terms would be the removal of the 440 kilograms of enriched uranium from Iranians' territory and limiting ballistic missiles production. And the third thing, which is on a lesser, I would say, urgency, is stopping the support of Iran that is giving Iran to the proxies, especially the Hezbollah. So right now, the Iranians are not even thinking about that. We saw they have a list of conditions that they have put out, 6 conditions that, again, nobody in his right mind would take them, certainly not President Trump. So I think what we are seeing is still trying to position behind the scenes. We don't know of many contacts, except that we know that the envoy, the presidential envoy, Steve Witkoff, has direct lines of communications with the Iranian foreign minister. So, and they have each other cell phone numbers. So I'm sure there are some messages going there, but he is not a decision maker. Unfortunately, what we see now in Iran, that it is the hardliners of the IRGC that now are making the decisions in Tehran, and they are as radical as can come, and they would prefer to die and actually to sacrifice the entire population of Iran, more than 90 million people. They prefer to do that than to surrender. And but at the end of the day, we will have to see a closure of this war, and the closure could be either by the fall of this regime, which is right now seems not very likely, or by a political solution, a settlement. And again, this settlement, Caleb, will have to include, certainly as far as Israel is concerned, will have to include the removal of all the enriched uraniums from Iran.
Aral, I go back to you. Is any possibility that Iran can agree to that, even to that, just that one condition, the removal of that enriched uranium, and still in some way save face, claim some kind of victory simply by surviving?
Well, as Ambassador Ayalon has already quite very well laid out, it's almost impossible to convince the hardliners of the IRGC to surrender a project that they have been working on since its inception in 1979. These are individuals who are willing to die in the service of what they perceive to be Allah's cause against the so-called Western imperialists in the form of the US and Israel. As Iranian strikes on Israel intensify, as was the case just yesterday in Arad and Dimona, we are likely to see escalations of regime decapitation by Israeli forces in Iran. Tehran today is currently facing unprecedented strikes, reportedly targeting regime officials. One particular official of note, whose status has not yet been confirmed, though most reports believe that he's currently alive, is Gholam Hossein Mohseni, who is the Chief Justice in Iran. He's the one currently sentencing hundreds of young Iranians to death for purported collaboration with Western forces. Of course, many of these charges are completely bogus, but we may see Ghulam Hussein soon eliminated. Part of what is necessary at this stage in the regime, or in the war, sorry, is for Israel to identify which are the hardliners who are most likely to push back against the surrendering of uranium and other missile stockpiles to Western coalition forces, if any agreement should be reached. It's important, though, to note that no agreement that is sustainable can be reached with this regime. The moment they get back on their feet, they will continue to engage in attritionary warfare and asymmetric warfare against targets, as they have done in the past. Of course, that's going to be much more difficult, but it doesn't mean that they don't have the willpower and determination required to do it again. This is a regime that has engineered an international network of proxies, one of which I might get onto in the next moment if the conversation permits. But it's not looking good for the regime either. There are concerns that they might persist. I don't believe that these concerns are particularly credible. There is no way that we can look at the persisting water shortages, inflationary crises, the complete removal of senior leadership from this regime and conclude that it is going to last in any meaningful way. It may be reformulated, but as the Islamic Republic, I don't believe it's going to last.
Well, let's hope that's the case. Ambassador Ayalon, what do you make of the reports that Israel already overnight began to attack power stations and energy infrastructure in Tehran ahead of the deadline that was in place originally by President Trump, and maybe even more striking, I don't know what to. Is this a case of the U.S. playing good cop, bad cop, with using Israel kind of as the bad cop in this situation as a warning to Iran?
Well, Clever, this is certainly could be the case, but I'm not sure all these reports are quite accurate, because Israel has been very judicious not to target too much of the oil installations or the natural gas facilities, simply not to aggravate the markets. And we know that this is on a high, very high importance for President Trump. I don't believe that Netanyahu would do anything which is not coordinated with Trump. So it could be that there are some, I would say, minor operations or minor attacks just to signal to the Iranians what might follow if they will not acquiesce with the cleaning of the or opening the Straits of Hormuz, and if they will continue to target energy installations in the Gulf area and also in Israel. So we'll have to wait and see. At this point, the US and Israel are very well coordinated. I think this is an operation which in the annals of military history will be written as the first large-scale AI war, but also as an operation of a seamless collaboration between two allies, which has not been before, not even in World War II.
Right. And Arel, if though it does come down to it, meaning that if in 5 days or sooner the U.S. and Israel launch full-scale strikes on Iranian infrastructure, basically knocking out electricity to certainly the major cities, for example, what potential impact does that? Would that have any impact on the remnants of the regime? And what are the other potential consequences of doing an unprecedented attack like that?
Well, first off, the motive for any kind of unprecedented attack like that would have to be with Trump's motives for the region. He has plans that include increased security frameworks that decrease American military expenditures in the Middle East. This vision of, let's say, Pax Silica, which was announced in December, of an AI-powered supply chain dominance led by the US as a rival to China, as well as the India Middle East corridor, that Trump envisions can only happen if Iran is not a credible security threat, and that has to mean targeting all the facilities that could be used for further enrichment of uranium. Now, let's say unprecedented strikes do take place. The first thing that is going to happen is that Iranian people on the ground will not only pay the price, but they might also be emboldened to take to the streets in greater numbers, like the ones that we saw at the beginning of this year. The problem, though, with having a power outage, let's say, as a result of these strikes, is that the reports of, let's say, 100,000 dead that we saw at the beginning might very, very rapidly climb when it comes to the IRGC's punishment or exaction of punishment against its own population. So we are going to have to see just how well the joint strikes might eliminate the Basij and the IRGC militiamen who are currently storming all sorts of Iranian cities and rural localities. But it is going to be quite a difficulty. There's nearly 900,000 individuals who are currently working and employed by the regime. Part of what will determine whether they continue to work for the regime is if they are no longer paid. And so Israel will have to identify exactly how to take out those payroll mechanics.
Right. And Danny, let's keep in mind that Israel is now fighting a war on two fronts, the Iranian front and also now the northern front. And as we reported earlier, that seems to be intensifying. Certainly the expanding of Israeli operations on the ground in South Lebanon, the bombing of key bridges across the Litani River. But now, if there is some substance to President Trump's tweet, or we know that he's trying to seek an off-ramp, what would happen if the U.S. and Iran reach some kind of agreement to end that part of the conflict? Could Israel continue its operations in Lebanon against Hezbollah in that eventuality?
Well, the short answer, Kalev, is yes. If the war with Iran is very, let's say, complex, and there is sensitivity about the oil markets and also politically for Trump in the United States, even within his own party, the Lebanon, the Hezbollah, is certainly, there is no ramification, international ones or global ones, or even political ones for Trump, a continuation of the war with the Hezbollah, and certainly Israel will not cease the attacks on Hezbollah, because this is a moment in time of rare opportunity where we can really bring Hezbollah down to a obsolete as a military force, and maybe keep it only as a political party, as it should be by all former agreements and all the UN resolutions in the Security Council, including 1701, where all militias in Lebanon should actually demilitarize, should lay down their arms. So there will be only one body with arms and the authority, which is the Lebanese army.
Right. And Arel, no matter how the war ends, certainly Iran's capacity, its financial capacity, its military capacity will have been severely diminished. Will it have been so to the point that it can no longer support proxies such as Hezbollah, some of the others, I would imagine, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, to the point where, for example, there can be agreements reached to diminish their military role of a group like Hezbollah and force it into a position where it would accept only a political role that wouldn't threaten Israel?
First, convincing Hezbollah to accept a political and non-military role, I mean, good luck. But I'm not concerned so much about the network of proxies inside the Middle East. Those have been deteriorating and subject to senior leadership decapitation for quite a while now. I'm more concerned about proxies beyond the Middle East. One of these is a new arrival to the scene in Europe in particular, called Harakat Ashab al-Yamin al-Islamiyya, which is the Islamic movement of the Companions of the Right. This is a reference to Surah Al-Waqiyah 56:38. I believe it was inaccurately reported by the Jerusalem Post that it was a reference to another excerpt of the Quran. That this is a doomsday chapter which refers to or promises, abundant shade and boundless fruits and virgin maidens to the warriors of Islam, who are known as the companions of the right in Islamic eschatology. It is known in or narrated by Jafar al-Sadiq, who was a medieval Islamic commentator, that people who recited Surah Al-Waqiyah would be rewarded by being spiritually closer to Ali ibn Abi Talib, who is the first Imam in 12-verse Shi'ism to which the Islamic Republic adheres. Now, Waqiyah, which is a word that has been ignored by many analysts, actually means the inevitable. And the inevitable in Islamic eschatology refers to resurrection. What we are looking at is an IRGC-backed sleeper cell that has been dormant for years, possibly decades, and has been activated in the wake of the elimination of Ali Khamenei. They have already been active so far with no casualties, but quite a lot of trauma. They claimed responsibility for more than 4 attacks, I believe, so far. One of them was an explosion near a synagogue in Liège. Another was a Molotov cocktail thrown at the entrance of a synagogue in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Yet another Molotov cocktail thrown at the entrance of a Jewish school in Amsterdam. And now we're also seeing reports as of yesterday that there was an arson attack against 4 United Hatzalah ambulances in Golders Green here in London, where I live. And Ashab al-Yamin also has claimed responsibility for this attack. So what we are looking at is a new Shiite militant transnational collective, which may be operating independently of the regime for now. And they are very, very dangerous, and they definitely should be on our radar.
All right. And I want to go, Daniel, just a last word to you about the Israeli home front. We've had it seems like a few hours of precious hours of relative quiet. We're heading into the Passover, the Pesach holiday. Just want to get a sense from you of how you think the home front is coping. It's stressing out a lot of people. Everyone there's general support, of course, in Israel for the Iran and Lebanon front. But for how long can this go on?
Well, as far as Israeli, let's say, resilience can go, I think very long time. And, we're unfortunately, but we're used to crisis, we're used to stress, we're used to actually being on the edge for so long. I think this is actually since our independence back in 1948, and this is partly what makes us so internally strong, so we can go on for a long time. And certainly, if there is a matter of stamina or a matter of a battle of wills, we will outlive both Hezbollah and Iran.
All right. Let's certainly hope that's the case, and the Passover holiday is a lot about Jewish resilience, overcoming difficult circumstances, and let's hope that that's going to be the case in this Passover, Pesach holiday. Ariel Tobelman, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you.
Now, our previous, one of our guests there just mentioned this incident, this very disturbing incident in London, and I want to turn to that now. In London, 4 ambulances belonging to the Jewish Hatzalah organization were torched overnight in northern London in what UK police are treating as an anti-Semitic hate crime. The vehicles were parked outside a synagogue in the Golders Green neighborhood. The Metropolitan Police said an investigation is underway and officers remain on the scene. Police confirmed there were no casualties in the fire that destroyed 4 Hatzalah ambulances. Superintendent Sarah Jackson of the police said officers remain on the scene. They're reviewing CCTV and online footage and are looking for 3 suspects. She added that the police will engage with faith leaders, increase patrols, and urged anyone with information to come forward, including anyone willing to come forward anonymously. Now, that footage showed 3 hooded individuals pouring gasoline on the ambulances and setting them ablaze. And for those who don't know, Hezbollah is a Jewish community volunteer organization that responds to medical emergencies. In a related development, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan announced a funding of over $1 million to support community organizations in fighting hate, intolerance, and extremism, although not specifically anti-Semitism. Well, joining us now from the UK is Dr. Zoe Strimpel. She's a columnist, an author, a broadcaster, and a historian. Dr. Strimpel, thank you so much for joining us. Before we discuss that incident of the ambulances and several others, I want you to talk about an incident that you were directly involved in, which involved a controversial art exhibit. We do have some examples of the art, but maybe I would like you to tell you what happened in that incident, which is also making some headlines there in the UK.
Well, of course, they're connected. It's funny that the order of events, in a way, what I was reacting to in that art was the sense that it's essentially saying these people are fair game. Go for it. They're scum of the earth, as in meaning Jews, Israelis, people like that. So demonization. Well, I was just, took myself off to Margate, which for those who don't know is it's like a Brooklyn on sea in the UK. It's just somewhere known for its art. Tracy Emin, it's her hometown, and she's turned it into this kind of very famous, desirable place to visit. So I just thought, I'll go to all the art, I'll pop into the small galleries. I saw people heading into this small gallery on a side street. I didn't look at any signage or anything. I just went in. And then immediately I could, everyone was wearing very big keffiyehs. There was Gaza cola being drunk. There were leaflets that were a little bit more extreme than usual about Israel. And then I looked at what was on the walls and my jaw just dropped. I mean, I'm in the fray. I know what there is around that's normal in the discourse. And I there's a bit of a gray area legally around the usage of Nazi imagery to describe Israel. Obviously, that violates the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, but that's not legally binding. It just informs governmental guidance. So but I had this strong sense I was seeing something illegal, partly because of the way I was feeling as someone who's fairly used to this stuff. And partly just because of what I was seeing. So this was like a fever dream of an obsessive. I mean, this guy thinks of nothing else day and night but of Israel and how demonic it is and how its tentacles have reached throughout society and how politicians from our chancellor to other left-wing politicians are Zionist dupes, and he had pictures of them up. There was very blatant rape denial of October 7th. He just writes it all out. There's this kind of scrawl that goes with all these pictures. But it was just the kind of, the Star of David, the swastikas, and then this picture you're showing now was one of the ones that upset me the most because, you see that kind of pointedly circumcised penis, which actually I didn't even notice that detail until a man pointed it out to me later. But, this is just legitimate criticism of Israel. That's what the police told me because they're not pursuing this. They told me. But this to me evokes Auschwitz. Okay, you've got a naked, bony, caricaturized Jew with tattoos all over him. And the words Israel scrawled across. I mean, it was just next level. And I think looking at it, it made me feel like this is incitement. I mean, if you look at dehumanized people associated with Israel to that extent, Israelis and Jerry Seinfeld, Simon Schama, other people are in this exhibition. I'm sure I will be too, because it's kind of like a running commentary. Then you think, well, these people, that what he's saying to people is they are fair game, they're scum of the earth, they're not even humans. So I confronted him. I don't actually even like these kinds of confrontations, but I just thought I have to because maybe they've never met a normal Jew before. I say normal because there are some self-hate. It's not even self-hating; it's group hating, of which one was actually in the exhibition, and he yelled at me that I was an idiot on the way out. But I just thought maybe they don't know. I'll just say the words and see what happens. And of course, immediately he was barking at me, telling me I was just using Hezbollah talking points. It was, that I just was nothing I said I meant. It was all just because I wanted to defend a genocide. I began to say, yeah, but, imagine if I was a black person. Didn't get any further. You're not black, are you? But the craziest thing was how proud he was of the Nazi imagery. I thought he'd at least try to say it wasn't Nazi imagery. When I said, look, this is Nazi imagery, I am shocked. I don't even know if this is legal. And he said, yeah, what do you expect? Israel are Nazis, and so on and so forth. And then said I should leave. And then the whole crowd kind of closed in on me. And the optics of it just killed me. So I said, yeah, that's right. Get the Jew out. This whole exhibition is attacking Jews in the most vicious and visceral way. And yet who's the one person that's being told to leave? So it just was such a kind of crazy, you almost felt the kind of memory of your ancestors rising up. I mean, that's kind of how I felt. Not physically endangered. I mean, that's the difference. But it was intense. So then I did call the police. By the way, on the way out, this is another, I mean, it's interesting. I think this is a mixture of misogyny and anti-Semitism, because you have that kind of cutting off, that hatred of a woman speaking up. And I've experienced that many a time in my life. So I know when I see it. And, call the police, like the jeering about the idea of calling the police, and the Community Security Trust, which is the body in the UK that monitors anti-Semitic hate crimes. So to make a mockery of that, the CST also features in his exhibition. It was real, like every ground I may wish to stand on was kind of disgustingly turned into a kind of thing to jeer at. But the police, interestingly, and I'm giving you a long spiel. I'll just quickly wrap up by saying, and this needs to be looked into. This is the nub of the whole thing.
Right.
This is why we have the Iran thing. I mean, the ambulances. The police went and had a look, and their conclusion was, this is all just legitimate criticism of the Israeli state. There is no difference between the Israeli state and any other state, Jewish state, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's all legitimate, and therefore nothing is going to happen. So I'm not really satisfied with that. But we are at the point where from on high, anything goes. If you can argue, it's the label of criticism of the Jewish state, and then you are normalizing a world in which people think violence is acceptable and they can get away with it, and that is what we have seen this morning in Golders Green. Right,
with the vandalizing of now, even vandalizing ambulances now becomes
firebombing. I mean,
accepted.
That's even new here. We're not used to that.
Right. Let me ask you, I mean, looking at those drawings, there's also no redeeming artistic value to it. You could have anti-Semitic art.
Yeah, but a lot of modern
done. It looks like a demented child. So what does that say about the general atmosphere there in the UK right now? I'm sort of broadening it out besides the specific incident to where basically expressions of Jew hatred, and that clearly is expression of Jew hatred, is not only given a pass, but is celebrated with a gallery showing as something that otherwise would probably never be in a gallery.
Well, I don't know. I mean, have you seen much contemporary art lately? I mean, a lot of it is just total crap. And actually, even Tracy Emin, anyway, my artistic opinion would say that if the subject matter was different, maybe it would just pass for like interesting art. But I agree, it was hideous. The gallery, I think the woman who was the curator, I think she was wearing, and this was the thing that upset me the most. And now you see how vicious the art world in the UK is. But she had the Hamas triangle on her shirt. And then over it, globalized the Intifada, which I believe is now illegal. But she had a little girl on her lap who was her daughter. And so the sense that it's all just kind of the artists, the curators, their children. It's just awful. So, yeah, right, the art scene, of course, anything. Yeah.
Right. Now, this incident is getting publicized. I'm wondering what kind of reactions you are getting via social media or in any other way over the fact that you were willing to confront the artist and then the crowd there at the gallery.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, you can imagine a Zionist woman who's just published a book called Good Slut, How Money, Sex, and Power Set Women Free. I am literally the embodiment of a nightmare for a lot of these people. So I'm getting a lot of predictable like fusion of the kind of misogynistic, anti-Semitic. Yeah, I mean, this artist, actually, it's quite concerning. I've had several people get in touch with me to say that he's ruined their lives. They've called him out for anti-Semitism. Two people have been quaking, getting in touch saying they can't go out anymore, that he's ruined their lives. I don't know, I haven't looked in more deeply to this, but yeah, I'm prepared. I'm already getting some of his, a fair trickle of abuse. Right. Certain stuff has to be passed on to the police, but this is absolutely standard. But this guy does seem to be scary, and he has a history, and he's clearly bullying and has emotionally damaged several people who have called him out for his anti-Semitism. The artist, he used to be he's done documentaries for the BBC. Right. He's been an establishment figure to some degree. So it just shows, I mean, there's people. This is no longer, when I started writing about this stuff, there was still a respectability, a fig leaf that was kept up to defend the anti-Semitism. But now I think we're just seeing how far gone that is. It's to be proud of Nazi imagery is a different level. And there's another, there's this open thing now where you can mock Jews for crying anti-Semitism. So Jeremy Corbyn's, the woman he's now has this party with, Zara Sultana, she wrote on Twitter recently, the smears of anti-Semitism aren't going to work anymore. So I'm saying it loud and proud, I'm an anti-Zionist. And that's kind of the vibe. It is violent. It's violent figuratively, discursively, and in reality as well. Although, if this is the work of Iran, even more of a different level.
Right. Well, we don't know yet, but certainly we see that violence take many forms, some of it organized and some of it, unfortunately, coming even from individuals. Dr. Zoe Strimple, thank you so much for joining us on ILTV. Pleasure. Well, after hearing that, it does seem that much of the world has turned against Israel in recent weeks, but the picture is not that simple. In fact, some nations have stood firmly behind the Jewish state in these troubled times. Among those is Argentina. That's in large part to the pro-Israel stance of President Javier Milei. But it appears that Argentina could be leading a trend of sorts in South and Central America. Joining us for more on that is Ilan Libeskind, Coordinator of International Relations with Latin America of the Likud party. Ilan, thank you for joining us. First of all, let's talk about Argentina and how it has been responding to what the events in Israel in the last few weeks.
Yeah, so since President Milei was elected president of Argentina, also from before he was elected, he was very proud and very loud on his campaign with his personal support to Israel and to the Jewish people. And now that he's president, we can see very clear his close relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And also he shows a lot of support to the Israel also now during the war.
Let's talk about some of the other countries in South America, because we do see some nations, some recent elections in some of the countries in South America whose previous governments were either indifferent or outright hostile to Israel. Do we see a trend emerging elsewhere on the continent in Central America as well? And what are some of the specific examples of that?
Yeah, Latin America is becoming increasingly important for Israel, not only diplomatically, also strategically. Many countries are looking for reliable relationships, and Israel, it's a proof for that on security, on economic and agriculture and technology. We can see it in Argentina, as you said before. We can see it with Ecuador, with Daniel Noboa, with President Daniel Noboa. We can see it also with Honduras, and now with Chile, with the elected President Cast, that he said also he wants to improve the relationship with Israel. We also can see in the last few years that Chile is a very clear support of the Palestine cause. And now, yeah, there is kind of a revolution with the right movements and political parties that they are getting elected in Latin America, and Israel, it's very happy with that.
Right. And let's talk about, we've seen countries. What's really striking is we're talking about countries like Argentina, for example, some of the other countries where for Hezbollah and Iran have really made efforts to penetrate into those countries. Also, because we should know, not everybody knows, there are substantial Palestinian populations, I know, in Chile, certainly in that sort of triangle of Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Maybe let's talk about that threat, the way that threat is manifested in South America, and how maybe this could change that, counter it.
Yeah, so there's a couple of important points on what is the presence of Hezbollah and Hamas in that countries. For example, as you said, in the triple borders of Paraguay and Brazil, the presence of these terrorist groups in South America, it's not active terrorism as we can see in the Middle East. It's basically economic operations that they make them bring that money in with illegal procedures, and then they send it to the terrorists in Lebanon, for example, in the case of Hezbollah. And in Latin America, it has been very easy for them to do that. Also, some of the countries, I will not say which ones, but they kind of protect that kind of activities, illegal activities of these terrorist groups. We can see it also with hiding of a couple of leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah in Venezuela. And yeah, it's very clear, and Israel know it, and also the US know it very well.
Right. Another, I think, force to be mentioned or trend to be mentioned is the increasing role that sort of Christian churches and groups in South and Central America, especially from the evangelical community, have played key roles. I know, for example, I believe in Honduras. Again, that's something maybe we should address, because it's not just governments. We are seeing some grassroots movement by a lot of citizens or residents there in Central and South America, especially among the Christian community or evangelical communities. Is enough outreach being done to really capitalize on that trend?
Yeah, we know that for example, in Argentina, we know it. President Milei, he's not a Jewish, but this trend of the evangelic and Catholic people who are support of Israel, and most of them for the Jewish people, yeah, it's a very trend. We know that Latin American countries are very Catholic, and yeah, that of course makes a very impact, not only with the government, also with the society. You can feel it also in the streets. You can see it.
All right, and hopefully that's something we'll be able to see manifested itself in the policies of these countries as well. Ilan Liebskin, Coordinator of International Relations with Latin America for the Likud Party. Thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you very much.
And now let's listen to a message from one of our partners here at ILTV.
At Haifa International, academic excellence isn't just a standard, it's a way of life. With 21 English-taught master's programs, world-class faculty, and Israel's top national score in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, students grow in every direction.
If you really want to challenge yourself academically, grow in a very diverse community, and be immersed in such an important and significant environment, University of Haifa is the place for you.
Located on the stunning Carmel Ridge, the Haifa blends academic excellence with a welcoming community.
Haifa International has a great combination of top-notch academics with a great community of students.
Whether you're pursuing a one-year master's or diving into research, Haifa gives you the tools, mentorship, and real-life insight to make your mark on the world. Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience.
Now, we do have an update on the major story of this hour, that dramatic breaking news. President Trump tweeting just a couple hours ago that the U.S. and Iran are currently in peace talks, good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of hostilities in the Middle East. And based on that, he was suspending plans for military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period. Now, immediately after that tweet went out, sources in Iran told media they denied all of President Trump's claims, say that, in fact, there were no talks being held and there was no change in the Iranian positions there. But now President Trump, following the Iranian denial, has doubled down on his initial claim. Speaking with Fox News, he says that Iran does want to make a deal to end the war. He believes there is a possibility that could happen within the next 5 days, in the 5 days, of course, before that deadline that he put forward. In the meantime, oil prices dropping dramatically over the past couple of hours in response to his news. Well, that is a wrap for today's news. Of course, for the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels. Keep up with us, of course, on social media and all our platforms. You could also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. Stay tuned stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Khaled Ben David. Be well, and thank you so much.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and coming up in today's newscast. Over 100 people injured and widespread damages from Iranian and Hezbollah missile attacks. U.S. President Trump gave a 48-hour deadline to Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And a new report indicates Iran now has the capabilities to target European cities. A bloody 24 hours here in Israel as we enter week 4 of the war with Iran. After a weekend of heavy fire across Israel that continued into today, the impact is being felt from the south to the north, with deadly strikes, widespread damage, and growing concern over what may come next. ILTV's Mayan Hoffman is on the ground now in Jerusalem. Mayan, what can you tell us?
Thank you, Lidar. I'm actually here in the old city of Jerusalem, where you can see behind me some of the extensive damage that was done from rocket shrapnel that hit down in the city on Friday. This is about a few hundred meters from the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, some of the holiest sites in the area. This was just part of an ongoing barrage of rockets that took place throughout the weekend and into today, including an anti-tank missile that was launched this morning by Hezbollah into northern Israel, murdering a man in the city of Miskaf-Am, Ofer Markowitz. Let's take a look at the full report.
The latest wave of attacks is leaving a deadly and widespread toll. In the south, Iranian ballistic missiles struck Dimona and Arad, wounding more than 100 people, including at least 11 seriously, after air defenses failed to intercept at least 2 missiles. Entire neighborhoods were damaged, and emergency crews spent hours pulling people from buildings and treating the wounded. At the same time, the north saw its own missile tragedy. A Hezbollah anti-tank missile attack on the border community of Miskav Am killed one person after vehicles caught fire, with first responders recovering a body from the scene. It marks the first fatality from Hezbollah since the start of this latest escalation. These attacks follow a weekend of sustained fire across the country. In central Israel, a preschool in Rishon LeZion was heavily damaged after being hit by shrapnel from an Iranian cluster missile. Officials say the destruction could have been far worse had children been inside. And in Jerusalem, fragments from a downed ballistic missile landed inside the old city, just hundreds of meters from the Western Wall and Temple Mount, underscoring how close these strikes are coming to some of the country's most sensitive areas. From Eilat in the south to Metula in the north, Israelis faced repeated sirens and at times simultaneous fire from Iran and Hezbollah.
Well, Lidar, so far, 19 people have been killed in this war. For comparison, 28 Israelis were killed in the last 12-day round of fighting. As this conflict enters its third week, the scale, the reach, and the coordination of these attacks appears to be intensifying.
Thank you, Mayan, for the report. And it's day 23 of the war with Iran. Over the past hours, the IDF conducted waves of airstrikes in Tehran and western Iran. The IDF says Israeli Air Force jets hit dozens of sites linked to Iran's ballistic missile program, including IRGC complexes, missile fuel facilities, component factories, and air defense systems. U.S. and Israeli leaders are saying the airstrikes will intensify even further this week. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
IDF jets struck dozens of sites in Tehran linked to Iran's ballistic missile program, including an IRGC complex, components factory, a missile fuel site, and storage facilities east of the city, where operatives were preparing launches. Earlier, the IDF says the Israeli Air Force struck a nuclear weapons research and development facility in Tehran. The target was located within Malik Ashtar University, which the IDF says was used to develop both nuclear weapons components and ballistic missiles. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir says the military is halfway through its campaign against Iran, with weeks of strikes producing systematic strategic gains. He warns Iran's long-range missiles reach beyond Israel, including Diego Garcia and European capitals.
רק אתמול איראן שיגרה טיר בליסטי בין יבשתי דו-שלבי לטווח של 4,000 קילומטרים לעבר מטרה אמריקאית באי דייגו גרסיה. טילים אלו לא נועדו לפגוע בישראל. הטווח שלהם מגיע לבירות אירופה. ברלין, פריז ורומא כולן נמצאות בטווח איום ישיר. למדנו מההיסטוריה העולמית והיהודית שהכחשת איום או התרפסות בפניו לא מעלימה אותו. להפך, היא מקרינה חולשה ומדרבנת משטרים קיצוניים.
Defense Minister Israel Katz says strikes against Iran will intensify this week. Katz said the IDF and U.S. forces will escalate attacks on Iranian infrastructure and commanders. Katz adds that the IDF and Israeli home front remain strong and operations will continue until all war objectives are achieved.
השבוע עוצמת התקיפות שיבצעו צה"ל וצבא ארצות הברית נגד משטר הטרור האיראני ונגד התשתיות עליהן הוא נשען תעלה מדרגה באופן משמעותי, והמערכה בהובלת נשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ וראש ממשלת ישראל בנימין נתניהו תימשך. אנחנו נחושים להוסיף ולהוביל את המתקפה נגד משטר הטרור האיראני, לערוף את ראשי מפקדיו ולסכל את יכולותיו האסטרטגיות עד להסרת כל איום ביטחוני מעל מדינת ישראל ומעל האינטרסים של ארצות הברית באזור.
Israeli and U.S. officials say their air campaign against Iran will intensify this, the start of the fourth week of the war, as both nations press on toward their strategic objectives in the conflict.
And U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to obliterate Iran's power plants if Iran does not fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours. In a social media post overnight, President Trump warned the U.S. will strike major energy infrastructure, marking a sharp escalation just a day after he spoke about winding down the war. U.S. warplanes and attack helicopters have intensified strikes on Iran's drones, naval vessels, and coastal facilities in a push to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a key global energy route. The strike campaign targeted underground facilities storing anti-ship missiles, mobile launchers, radar systems, and intelligence sites. CENTCOM Commander Brad Cooper says U.S. forces have eliminated over 8,000 targets, including 130 Iranian vessels, dealing what he calls the largest naval blow since World War II. He said Iranian missiles, attack drones, and naval assets are steadily decreasing, and the Iranian Navy and Air Force are largely grounded. Meanwhile, unconfirmed reports say the United States struck Natanz nuclear enrichment facility using bunker buster bombs. The attack on Natanz prompted Iran to fire 2 ballistic missiles at the UK-US base on Diego Garcia. The attack failed, but the launch strike demonstrates Iran's missile range could reach European capitals. The IDF says it did not conduct any strikes in Natanz and cannot comment on U.S. actions. U.S. officials say Iran may have used a space launch vehicle to extend the range of ballistic missiles fired at Diego Garcia almost 2,500 miles away. Officials say Iran's Simorgh space launch vehicle could increase missile range, although accuracy may be reduced. And among President Trump's latest statements, he posted that the U.S. is very close to meeting objectives in Iran, including degrading missile capabilities, destroying defense industrial bases, eliminating Navy and Air Force assets, and preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear capability. Trump urged countries using the Strait of Hormuz to police it themselves, saying the U.S. will help if needed, but will not take primary responsibility. And moving on to the northern front, the war with Hezbollah in Lebanon is intensifying, with an additional IDF division now preparing for deployment to deepen the ongoing ground incursion along the border. Amid the fighting, the U.S. is welcoming a Lebanese proposal for direct talks with Israel. ILTV's Devo Klein has the latest.
Over the weekend, the Air Force completed waves of airstrikes in Beirut and other locations in Lebanon, hitting central Hezbollah headquarters. Targets included buildings used by the organization's intelligence directorate and air defense array. The ground incursion is continuing and is about to get larger. The 162nd Armored Division has completed preparations for deployment in southern Lebanon. It would become the number 5th Division in southern Lebanon, joining the 146th, 91st, 36th, and 210th Divisions as Israel moves to expand its buffer zone against Hezbollah. In South Lebanon, soldiers from the Givati Infantry Brigade killed armed Hezbollah terrorists in close-quarters combat. Additional terrorists were struck by an Israeli Air Force craft, and 3 more were eliminated with tank fire. No Israeli forces were injured in the scene. Troops from the 36th Rage Division located weapons stockpiles, eliminated dozens of Hezbollah gunmen, and destroyed observation posts targeting IDF forces. And amid the warfare, France is urging diplomacy. Meeting with Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, warning against a broader Israeli ground operation in southern Lebanon. The U.S. ambassador to Lebanon praised President Joseph Aoun's push for negotiations, saying issues cannot be resolved without dialogue, though it remains unclear if talks can move forward as the war intensifies.
And joining us now with more on the latest is Brigadier General Amir Avivi, founder and CEO of the Israel Defense and Security Forum. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, U.S. President Donald Trump has given Iran an ultimatum: open the Strait of Hormuz or else face obliteration of its energy infrastructure. What do you make of this threat?
Well, obviously, it's crucial globally for the strait to be opened. And I think it's time the Iranian regime pays heavily economically, not just kinetically, for disrupting the ability of tankers to move through the strait. So I think it's the right direction. We are degrading them kinetically in many ways: the factories, the ballistic missiles, the drones, the forces that are oppressing the Iranian people. But you have to choke them economically also in order to really bring down the regime. We have to render them incapable of paying salaries. We have to attack also the banks that support the Revolutionary Guards, just as we are doing with Hezbollah in Lebanon, really degrading their ability to pay salaries and be sustainable economically.
Now, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir estimated that we're only halfway through this war, even though U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he's considering winding down the war. Now, here in Israel, we really are feeling the effects. We may only see one missile launched at a time, but it certainly is enough to cause mass injuries and damages, just as we've seen in the last 24 hours. So first of all, how much longer can the regime keep this up? And is it truly possible to diminish their entire missile capabilities?
Well, I think the war was planned for 6 months originally, and 3 weeks, a month and a half, and 3 weeks have passed. So yes, we're in the middle. We have degraded them dramatically, and every attack is meaningful and destroying them systematically, but they still have some capabilities. They've been preparing for many, many years. And obviously, you cannot destroy everything in a very short time. You need some time to do it. But the combined efforts that the US and Israel are doing, including the factories and attacking the besieged forces and the leadership, the combined effort at the end of the day will bring a fall of this regime. They won't be able to sustain this for long. We can say that in a way there is a siege also on Iran. They are not exporting or importing. This is not sustainable in the long term. So we need to understand what was built in 47 years, you don't destroy in a week. It takes some time, and we have the freedom of action. We dominate the skies and the seas, and they are being degraded systematically.
And you meant 6 weeks, not 6 months initially. Now,
right, 6 weeks.
Yeah, and I do want to talk to discuss the failure of the missile defense system that we saw twice now. It seems overnight. More missiles are making it through these days than in the initial stages of the war. Why is that? What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'm not sure there is an answer. It's a statistic. They shot 400 ballistic missiles so far at Israel. The rate of success of interception is 92%. It's very, very high. All kinds of ballistic missiles were intercepted. There is nothing special about this specific ballistic missiles. It's not something new. We dealt with these ballistic missiles even a day or two before. But, their air defense have to do their debriefing and understand how they can get better. We really want to manage to intercept all of them. But we know the statistics. It's usually around 90%. Now we are doing even better, 92%. But every single ballistic missile that hits, it's a drama, and it's dangerous.
And now we saw over the weekend, we know that Iran is capable of launching missiles at a great distance, even to Europe. What do we know right now about their intermediate range ballistic missiles? Because it seems to have taken many by surprise.
Yes, the fact that they shot the island Diego Garcia, which is 4,000 kilometers of Iran, sends a clear message to Europe. All of you are in danger. They can reach Paris, which is 4,200 kilometers from Iran, from Tehran specifically, and most of the center and eastern countries in Europe. And this is a message. This is a threat to all of you, and you need to help. To me, it's amazing that the European countries, when they are called to assist, and not even offensively, just to assist in Hormuz, they decline after the U.S. fought 2 world wars, saving them, and has defended them for 80 years now against Russia. And I think there will be very serious consequences for Europe for not stepping up. They might lose American support. America has invested $288 billion in Ukraine. I don't see them continuing to do so. They're not going to continue defending Europe, and there will be consequences for what Europe is doing.
Absolutely. So a lot of moving pieces here. Brigadier General Amir Avivi, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
And tonight in Israel, children are going to sleep with the sound of sirens, rockets, and uncertainty. Schools are closed, families have been evacuated from their homes, and many parents have been called away for reserve duty. For thousands of children, the trauma of war has become part of everyday life. But in the middle of this crisis, help is reaching them. For over 20 years, Shiloh Israel Children's Fund has been on the front lines of the emotional battle, bringing urgent trauma care to the children who need it most. Through its mobile therapy unit, trained trauma therapists travel directly to children in their homes and to hotels housing evacuated families. Instead of waiting for help, the help comes to them, providing immediate emotional support, stabilization, and care for children struggling with fear and trauma. These moments of care can mean the difference between lasting trauma and the beginning of healing. But this critical work depends on people who are willing to help. So if you want to stand with Israel's children during this time of crisis, please donate today. You can visit israelchildren.org/now, because every child deserves the chance to heal. And turning now to Gaza, the IDF targeted 4 armed Hamas terrorists in the northern strip, striking them after they posed an immediate threat to Israeli troops. The latest clash with the terrorists comes as the Trump Board of Peace has presented Hamas with a detailed plan to disarm, a required step towards a lasting ceasefire. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz has the latest.
In the northern Gaza Strip, combat teams identified the terrorists in 2 separate incidents in the Yellow Line area, where they posed an immediate threat. The forces then attacked and eliminated the targets to protect Israeli troops. Meanwhile, amid the ceasefire violations, this Gaza diplomatic update. The Trump Board of Peace has presented Hamas with a detailed plan to disarm, a potential step toward a lasting ceasefire. The full document has not been released, and key details remain unclear. Under the proposal, Hamas would reportedly surrender heavy weapons such as rocket launchers and provide maps of its underground tunnel network. It's not yet known how or to whom these would be transferred. The Board of Peace is a new international body established under President Trump to oversee the ceasefire. Nikolai Mladenov, the board's high representative for Gaza, discussed the proposal with senior Hamas leaders last week in Cairo. A fragile U.S.-brokered ceasefire remains in place in Gaza. The proposed international stabilization force meant to implement a long-lasting ceasefire and stabilize the Strip has been authorized and planned. A few countries have pledged troops, but it's yet to be deployed on the ground.
And moving on, as Israel navigates ongoing tensions with Iran, many families are rethinking what it means to build a secure future here. For some, that includes the dream of owning a home, but in today's climate, the process can feel uncertain and overwhelming. That's where Aliyah comes in. With teams across the country, the company provides end-to-end guidance from choosing the right location to coordinating legal and financial steps. Their goal is simple: to bring clarity and confidence to buyers during a complex time. Because today, buying a home in Israel isn't just an investment, it's a step towards stability. To learn more, you can scan the QR code on your screen. And in other news, all schools across Israel will move to remote learning today and tomorrow. The announcement by Education Minister Yoav Kish comes after strikes in Dimona and Arad left more than 100 people injured, and after a cluster munition damaged an empty daycare in Rishon LeZion. All in-person classes, including special education, were canceled nationwide following consultations with the IDF Homefront Command. Remote learning will continue until at least Tuesday, when the Passover holiday break begins. Kish also announced the cancellation of Passover school camps in 18 municipalities in central Israel, saying it would be inappropriate to hold them under current security conditions. Schools had only partially reopened last week in lower-risk areas, but will now close again as missile threats continue. In major cities, including Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, students will have been out of classrooms for more than a month by the end of the holiday break. At Haifa International, academic excellence isn't just a standard, it's a way of life. With 21 English-taught master's programs, world-class faculty, and Israel's top national score in the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, students grow in every direction.
If you really want to challenge yourself academically, grow in a very diverse community, and be immersed in such an important and significant environment, University of Haifa is the place for you.
Located on the stunning Carmel Ridge, the Haifa blends academic excellence with a welcoming community.
Haifa International has a great combination of top-notch academics with a great community of students.
Whether you're pursuing a one-year master's or diving into research, Haifa gives you the tools, mentorship, and real-life insight to make your mark on the world. Haifa International. Master your mind, live your Israel experience. And Israel is considering two unusual tax measures to ease pressure on businesses and households as the war with Iran drives global oil prices above $100 per barrel. The finance ministry is discussing cutting the fuel tax by at least 50 agurot per liter, aiming to keep 95-octane gasoline, the standard fuel, below 8 shekels before Passover. The move would be designated to limit inflation, which has already risen due to soaring fuel costs affecting transportation, manufacturing, shipping, and electricity. At the same time, manufacturers and exporters are pushing to pay taxes in U.S. dollars instead of shekels to reduce currency volatility and align payments with revenues earned in dollars. The Israel Tax Authority is reviewing the request, which could represent a fundamental change in how exporters report and pay taxes. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is said to support a temporary reduction in fuel taxes, with the decision expected this week on the size of the cut. The goal is to prevent further economic pressure as global energy costs climb during the conflict with Iran.
If you follow ILTV, now you can wear it too. Welcome to the official ILTV store at www.iltvshop.com, where you'll find our latest merchandise, from the famous ILTV mug to t-shirts, caps, and more. And now, for this historic moment, we've launched a special Roaring Lion collection, featuring the official Roaring Lion 2026 t-shirt, designed with the official campaign emblem and a matching cap. Every purchase helps support independent journalism from Israel and the work we do every day to bring you the real story. Visit www.iltvshop.com, explore the collection, and wear the story.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Cloudy skies and part rain showers are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures with highs of 17 degrees Celsius or 63 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's at ILTV_Israel on all platforms. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gavelazi. Be well, stay safe, and thank you so much for watching. And as Israelis continue living with missile sirens during the ongoing war with Iran, many children are still coping with the trauma of October 7th and years of terror attacks. For more than 2 decades, the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund has been providing specialized therapy and support to help young victims heal. Joining us now is Chava Kleinman, Vice President of the organization, to share a little bit more. Chava, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, can you tell us how the Children's Fund was established? I mean, what led to the creation of this organization?
Sure. So about over 2 decades ago, the founder and president, David Rubin, was driving from Jerusalem to his home in Shiloh and was ambushed by terrorists on the road. And he and his 3-year-old son were shot. He was shot in the leg and his 3-year-old son was shot in the head. And miraculously, they survived the attack and they're okay today. But the trauma that he saw on his son and the other children around him made him decide that we needed to do something to help the children in Israel.
And, you know, since the October 7th attacks, and now, of course, with the ongoing war with Iran and the missile sirens and, you know, sounding really throughout the day and throughout the night, how has the level of trauma amongst Israeli children, you know, how has that changed?
So we've seen an incredible increase in trauma amongst children all over Israel, because this is not something that's only affecting children in a certain place, but all over the country. And we see children that don't even have time to try to heal from the trauma, because what's happening now is that it's continuous trauma. And one of the things we know about trauma is that, you know, we try to heal trauma when there's a break in trauma, but that's not happening. So it's a completely different scene that we're seeing in children all over the country.
And can you maybe talk about some of the main projects or the therapeutic treatments that the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund provides, sort of to help children cope with these, trauma, with these changes, and help sort of rebuild their sense of safety?
So because we're working with children, we need to work in very creative ways, right? You can't just sit down with a child and say, what's wrong? So we work with a number of trained therapists in very different creative therapies: music, drama, arts, small animal therapy, horseback riding therapy. So we do a lot of that kind of work. We also do group work with children in schools or in different centers or after-school activities. We try to get to whoever we can, and especially now, we have mobile therapy teams that are going out to people who can't make it to centers, whether it's evacuated families in the hotels or people who just can't leave their homes for whatever reason. So we work in those kind of ways, and also a lot of resilience programming, because also that's very important at this time.
And can you tell us a little bit about the resilience programming?
Sure. So, something I always like to say is that, yes, Israelis are resilient and children are resilient, but if we don't give them the tools to help them and the support that they need, they're human beings in the end. So we do a lot of, like I said, group work or individual therapy, but also family therapy and also support for parents, because when you're working with children, you also need to help their parents.
Absolutely. And you spent many years working in other community roles before joining the organization. What led you to personally take on this mission?
I think over years of really working with families and children and dealing with trauma, I realized that if we don't help the future generation in not only emergency crisis healing, but long-term healing, resilience care, what is the future of our generation going to look like? What are our children going to look like? And that really just made me want to get involved and keep doing the important work that we're doing.
Well, it really is crucial and important work, especially during these times. Chava Kleinman, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And so to help our children overcome the trauma of war, you can scan the QR code on your screens or visit israelchildren.org now.
Welcome back to Axis of Truth. Another week here in Israel, another week running to bomb shelters as the war against the Islamic regime continues. And while Iranians are risking their lives and even celebrating when the regime's military infrastructure is hit, you'd never know that from much of the media in the United States and the UK. That's why, to kick off the show today, we're going through some of the greatest hits of this war so far in the international media. This is a parade of some of the most distorted, morally confused, and absurd media coverage that we've seen in years. And that's saying a lot given we just survived October 7th a few years ago. Let's start with CNN. Now, this week, CNN aired 4 minutes straight of Mojtaba Khamenei speaking directly from Islamic Republic State Television, a regime media network that's currently under sanctions by the United States. No pushback or context was given, just straight propaganda from a government that spent decades funding terrorism and killing Americans. Now, you may have also heard by now that CNN sent a reporter into Iran with the permission of the regime itself, which means that every second of that reporting that was taking place under government supervision, and it was with their permission. But the absurdity didn't stop there for CNN. Christiane Amanpour ran a segment about the Iran-Iraq war in which the Islamic regime sent children across minefields as human shields. Now, thousands of children were given plastic keys and sent to walk across landmines so that soldiers wouldn't have to. This is one of the most horrific crimes in the regime's history, and there's a lot of crimes. But instead of presenting this as a war crime against children, the segment framed it as a symbol of national devotion and love for the regime. Children being sent to their deaths was presented as a heartwarming story. Check this out.
President Trump called for Iran's military to lay down its arms or face certain death. But he and his war planners had failed to understand or remember the strong religious fervor that commits millions to face death in the name of their faith and guarding their Islamic revolution. So we dug into the archives to find In the Name of God, the incredible series based on exclusive footage acquired by CNN in the 80s at the height of the Iran-Iraq war. In this piece, we see a boy, Mohammed, at the very most 17 years old, probably younger, who was recruited for the front by Iran's paramilitary, the Basij. His family bid him a fond farewell, knowing that he would likely be martyred for one of these children's missions would be acting as human minesweepers.
These kids just received 2 weeks training and just how to shoot with the guns, and they send them to battlefield using them for the field to destroy it.
Landmines have been the focus of much outcry in this war, specifically the use of human minesweepers, waves of young volunteers going to their deaths, paving the way for tanks that are in short supply.
And if that wasn't enough, Amanpour then hosted Reza Aslan, who confidently declared that Iranians are now rallying around the flag in support of the regime. Take a look.
And death starts raining down from the skies, what tends to happen is that people rally to their government regardless of how much they hate their government.
Really, that same old tired and disproven trope? Because the images we actually see coming from Iranians in the streets of Iran and across the diaspora show something very, very different. The flag the Iranians are waving isn't the flag of the Islamic Republic. It's the lion and sun flag, the flag of Iran before the 1979 revolution, the symbol of Iran, the Iran they hope to rebuild after the regime is gone. But if you watched that segment, you would never know that. And CNN wasn't the only outlet having a bad week. Over at Haaretz, the paper ran a profile of Ali Larijani with the remarkable headline, "Ruthless Leader, Brilliant Philosopher Ali Larijani, Iran's Most Powerful Man." Brilliant philosopher? This is the same regime official who has been sanctioned and plays a central role in the regime's oppression of Iranians as well as terror activities. Instead of presenting him as one of the architects of that repression, the article portrayed him as some sort of intellectual statesman to humanize his image. Over in the UK, Channel 4 continued the embarrassing war reporting by claiming that Israel had shut down access to Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan for Muslims. Except that's not at all what happened. The restrictions in question were Home Front Command civil defense guidelines that apply to everyone in Israel during periods of heavy ballistic missile fire. They require people to remain within a certain distance of a bomb shelter, and they prohibit large gatherings, to prevent mass casualties in war. And yet somehow the report framed it as a religious persecution. But perhaps the most morally disturbing example this week came after the attempted terror attack on a Jewish school in Michigan. On March 12th, the Lebanese-American man rammed a vehicle packed with explosives into Temple, Israel in West Bloomfield, Michigan. Now, the building contained a preschool with more than 140 children inside at the time. 140 children were in that building. Now, in somewhat of a miracle, the attacker was killed after security responded and prevented what could have been a terrible mass casualty terror attack. But instead of universal condemnation, what we're seeing in response from some parts of the media is something else entirely. On GV News, for example, commentator Angelina McCahey suggested that the synagogue may have been targeted because it aligns with Israel and because Israel is in its name. Check this out.
Have these attacks been predominantly against Jewish targets?
Well, I can't really speak on that directly. I can say that this situation, this was an Israeli temple. It was aligned with Israel. I will say that.
A Jewish temple?
A Jewish temple.
A Jewish synagogue is not an Israeli temple.
It's called the Real Israel Temple.
They're Jewish.
Okay.
They're the people of Israel.
How do you? So I'll just finish my point. So
it was wrong from the premise. They're not Israeli. They're Jewish.
So they're called the Real Israeli Temple, yes, and they do align with Israel and their beliefs. So this attack. Also, what we found out from the guy who attacked them was that he did have family in Lebanon that was killed from strikes, and that was confirmed. We don't know whether or not who those family members were, but it was posted on social media, his social media, the night prior to the attack, that it was actually his family and his kids that were killed.
I'm almost speechless in response to the level of stupidity here. Think about how insane that argument is. First off, to be so insanely ignorant that you don't understand a synagogue called Temple Israel has nothing to do with the modern day state of Israel. And second, to bring that up as if it's somehow relevant or mitigating when someone drives a truck full of explosives into a children's school in America because they are Jews. What year are we living in? Also, bringing up the fact that he has relatives who died in Lebanon is completely irrelevant, but even more so when you understand that his family are in Hezbollah and his brother was actually a Hezbollah commander. So it's not at all surprising, since Hezbollah has been attacking Israelis nonstop since joining the war. This isn't analysis. It's an attempt to remove responsibility from the terrorist and shift it to the victim. And yes, holding American Jews responsible for the policies of a country thousands of miles away that they don't even live in is anti-Semitism. Sadly, the moral confusion didn't stop there this week. The New York Times ran headlines that sounded less like reporting on a terrorist attack and more like a character profile. A restaurant worker was a quiet presence. Then he attacked a synagogue. In other words, the story wasn't the terrorist trying to massacre Jewish children. The story was humanizing the terrorist. And if you wonder where Angelina on GB News got this idiotic idea about Temple Israel, well, look how the New York Times titled the story about this synagogue. Temple Israel was founded in 1941, dedicated to the formation of a Jewish state. What? A house of worship in Michigan's defining trait is being dedicated to forming a Jewish state? Unfortunately, this same narrative of how the terrorist family members were killed in Lebanon was also pushed by Dropsite News, a media network funded through Soros-connected networks, which amplified stories designed to generate sympathy for the attacker, a narrative that was quickly echoed by useful idiots like Megyn Kelly. Now, the most insane part about all of this, though, is that even if the synagogue was owned by the Israeli government and was full of IDF soldiers, so what? You still don't have a right to drive a truck full of explosives into a house of worship. Why are we even debating this? Only when it comes to anti-Semitic attacks, we hear this endless excuse-making and posturing, oh, Israel, shut up already. This is how extremism gets normalized, not through open support of terrorism, but through the slow introduction of excuses. And this problem doesn't stop with mainstream media. A recent analysis found that many of the most viral posts from this war pushing anti-American and anti-Israel narratives are not even coming from American accounts. They're coming from networks of accounts operating outside the United States that are coordinating to push these narratives into Western audiences. In other words, while Iranians are risking their lives to fight the regime, the information environment in the West is being flooded with completely distorted narratives that serve the regime's interests. And when you step back and look at this entire week of coverage, whether social media or media, the most extraordinary thing is not what's happening in Iran. The most extraordinary thing is how badly much of the Western media is failing to cover it. Because the biggest obstacle to understanding what's happening right now isn't a lack of information. It's the way that information is being presented to you in America. Beyond understanding evil, however, there are other consequences of this disinformation campaign. And while some media figures are busy humanizing the Islamic regime or minimizing the threat that it posed, the real-world consequences are already paying out across multiple continents with small-scale terror attacks and anti-Semitic violence. According to data from the Combat Antisemitism movement, global anti-Semitic incidents increased by 34% just the first week of the war. Out of 154 incidents recorded worldwide, 73 were linked directly to the war in Iran, with perpetrators motivated by support for the regime or by conspiracy theories blaming Jews and Israel for the conflict. And that surge isn't just online hate. It's showing up in real-world attacks. Take the United States. In the terror attack in Michigan, Ayman Mohammed Ghazali targeted Temple Israel, which is a major synagogue in the area that also houses that Jewish preschool I mentioned, where 140 children and staff were inside the building. The only reason that a major massacre didn't take place is because of a heroic security guard who succeeded in stopping him before he could reach the children. But that wasn't the only incident in the United States, tragically. In Austin, Texas, a gunman opened fire in a mass shooting that killed 2 people and wounded 14 others. Investigators found he was wearing a shirt reading "Property of Allah" and an undershirt with the flag of the Islamic Republic. Authorities also found Iranian symbols in his possessions. In New York City, 2 men named Amir Balat and Ibrahim Qayoumi were arrested after throwing an IED into a crowd during a protest near Gracie Mansion, the residence of the mayor of New York. Now, federal investigators say the men were inspired by ISIS and even discussed carrying out what they called an attack even larger than the Boston Marathon bombing. Now in San Jose, California, 2 Jewish men speaking Hebrew were violently assaulted at a restaurant, with the attacker shouting, "Don't mess with Iran." and other anti-Semitic slurs as he beat them. So in 1 week, you have a Hezbollah-connected attack on a synagogue in Michigan, a mass shooting in Texas with Iranian symbolism, an ISIS-inspired IED attack attempt in New York, and a violent anti-Semitic assault in California. In Canada, the situation is even worse. Not only has Canada become a front line in the regime's campaign of anti-Semitic attacks, with 3 different synagogues being fired at last week, but there's also been intimidation and violence against Iranian dissidents abroad, to the point that Canada really cannot protect them. Earlier this month, Canadian police arrested 2 suspects who are now being charged with first-degree murder in the killing of an Iranian dissident, Masoud Masjoudi, a former instructor at Simon Fraser University, who had been reported missing in Burnaby, British Columbia. Now, investigators said that Masjoudi's disappearance wasn't random and treated it as a targeted homicide from the start. The suspects identified by police are Mehdi Ahmadzadeh Razavi and Arizu Sultani, both from the Vancouver area. Now, they're facing first-degree murder charges in connection with his death, but the case has raised alarm amongst Iranians inside of Canada, as well as lawmakers who have raised alarms for years about the IRGC networks and its associates operating inside Canada. They're monitoring and intimidating members of the Iranian diaspora. Now, across Europe, we're seeing similar patterns. In the UK, dissidents have been beaten by regime thugs at protests, and anti-Semitic attacks are also growing. In Belgium, an explosion damaged a synagogue in what authorities called a targeted anti-Semitic incident. In Rotterdam, a synagogue was targeted in an arson attack. In Amsterdam, an explosive device was detonated outside a Jewish school, which the officials described after the fact as a deliberate attack against the Jewish community. Security services are also investigating incidents around synagogues in Oslo and Trondheim, both in Norway, where suspicious individuals were arrested near Jewish institutions. And these attacks are not random. A new extremist group calling itself Ashab al-Yamin, or the Companions of the Right, has claimed responsibility for some of these attacks, including the incidents in Belgium and the most recent one in the Netherlands just a few days ago. The group appeared suddenly this week and released videos calling for attacks against Jewish targets. Now, what's particularly concerning is that these videos were distributed through Telegram channels that are associated with the Shiite Axis network of groups that are linked to Hezbollah and the IRGC, raising obvious questions about whether this new organization is connected to the Islamic Republic's proxy network. And that's exactly what security services have been warning about for years. The IRGC has built a global network of proxies, militias, ideological supporters that can operate far beyond Iran's borders. They're networks that target Jewish communities and Iranian dissidents, and ultimately anyone who challenges the regime. So when people claim that this war is just a regional conflict that has nothing to do with the West, that it's not our war, the events of this week tell a very different story. The synagogue attack in Michigan, the mass shooting in Texas, an IED attack in New York, gunshots at 3 separate synagogues in Canada, a murdered Iranian dissident, a violent anti-Semitic assault in California, a synagogue bombing in Belgium, an arson attack in Rotterdam, an explosive device targeting a Jewish school in Amsterdam, and suspicious activity around 2 more synagogues in Norway. It's not random. It's the global shadow of a regime that has spent 47 years building proxy cells and other terror networks across multiple continents. And the events of this week show exactly how far those networks can reach. But there is another front in this conflict that often receives far less attention than it should. It's the war that the Islamic Republic has been waging against its own athletes for decades. And this week, we saw another example of that system in action. As I talked about last week, several members of Iran's women's national football team competing at the Women's Asian Cup in Australia defected after refusing to sing the national anthem of the regime before their match and then getting threatened by the regime immediately after. Now, in the days since then, some of the players who initially sought protection in Australia have reversed course and are now returning to Iran after reports of intense pressure on them, their families, and threats from the regime. Now, those who were working on this case did confirm that the players were most likely coerced and that their families back in Iran were being pressured, which is a method that that government has repeatedly used against athletes, journalists, and activists. In other words, even when Iranian athletes are thousands of miles away, the regime still has ways of reaching them. The West is unable to protect many of these dissidents. Part of the reason is because they've allowed the IRGC to build up a presence in so many of these countries. And this repression of athletes, it's hardly a new phenomenon. In 2020, the regime executed Navid Afkari, a champion wrestler who had participated in anti-regime protests in 2018. They executed him after brutal torture and despite international pressure. The year before that, we saw Iranian judoka Saeed Molai fled the country after being ordered by government officials in Iran to withdraw from the World Championship so that he wouldn't have to face off against Israeli judoka Sagi Muki. Now, this policy of forcing athletes to boycott Israeli opponents has been documented for many years across multiple sports, including judo, wrestling, boxing, and weightlifting. Athletes who refuse to follow those orders risk their careers or worse. One of the most prominent defectors is Kimia Alizadeh, who was Iran's first ever women's Olympic medalist in Taekwondo. Alizadeh later left the country and announced that she couldn't represent a system that used athletes as political propaganda while denying women basic rights. She competed for the Olympic refugee team instead in 2020. Now, this history of repression against athletes in Iran actually goes back much further. In 1988, Forzun Abdi, the captain of the women's national volleyball team, was executed after spending years in prison for opposing the regime. That same year, Mashid Barzaghi, a member of the Olympic soccer team, was executed for distributing anti-government newspapers. And in 1981, Olympic wrestler for the country of Iran was executed alongside 29 other political prisoners. The list goes on and on. This history, is not just about individual cases. It's about a system where the Islamic Republic uses sport as a tool of political propaganda and ideological control. They've even used international sporting events to normalize and sanitize their security apparatus. At the Tokyo Olympics, Iranian gold medal winning shooter Javad Foroughi won a gold medal while also being a member of the IRGC, who served the regime in Syria. But the truth is that the entire structure of sports organizations in Iran is closely tied to the regime itself. The current head of the Iranian Olympic Committee, Mahmoud Khosrovi Vafa, has served in the IRGC and was even a former bodyguard of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. In other words, the institution that's supposed to represent Iranian athletes in the Olympic movement is directly connected to the same power structure that controls the country politically. And this is one of the reasons why a growing group of Iranian athletes and human rights advocates have launched a campaign calling for the dissolution of the Iranian Olympic Committee. In open letters sent to the International Olympic Committee, athletes document how the Iranian sports system operates under government control. They describe a structure in which athletes are monitored, threatened, and forced to follow state ideology, including the policy of boycotting competing against Israeli athletes. Now, this system violates the core principles of the Olympic Charter, which require sport to be free from political discrimination as well as government interference. As long as the current structure remains in place, Iranian athletes are going to continue to face intimidation and political pressure. And this issue is not limited to athletes because the regime even polices its own fans. Inside Iran, women are still forbidden from attending football matches, and there have been multiple incidents in which women were even assaulted, beaten, or pepper sprayed by security forces for trying to enter stadiums. Sport in Iran isn't just sport, it's a political system. And given the history, there's an increasingly strong argument that Iranian athletes should not be forced to compete under the flag of the regime that controls that system. The international community has already taken a similar approach in other cases. Russian athletes, for example, were allowed to compete, but only as neutral athletes under a blank flag rather than representing the Russian state. The same principle can and should apply here. Because if sport is supposed to represent fair competition and human dignity, then Iranian athletes themselves need to be protected from the political system that controls them. And now it's time for this week's Good, Bad, and Ugly, which we're doing in reverse order so we can end on a positive note. So this week, the ugly story goes to the regime's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, who sat down with CBS host Margaret Brennan and declared that the reason he has internet is because he's the voice of the Iranian people. Can't make this up. Take a look.
I just do want to point out, you're speaking to us via Zoom. The Iranian people don't have open internet access, but you do. Why?
Well, because I'm the voice of Iranians, and I have to defend their right. So this is why I have access to internet to just have our voice being heard by the international community. But internet is closed because of the security reasons, because we are under attack, we are under aggression, and we have to do everything to protect our people. In any country, there are, urgent measures taken for the sake of war.
Protect your people? Are you kidding me? You just murdered 40,000 of them. But according to Araghchi, he, being the regime, speaks for the Iranian people. Now, in ordinary circumstances, that claim might be more laughable than anything else, but right now it's particularly absurd because at the very moment that Araghchi was making that claim on American television, the Islamic Republic has shut down the internet access across Iran for nearly 2 weeks. 92 million people completely cut off from the world. Iranians inside the country have been desperately trying to connect through Starlink, also punishable by death, or through other internet filtering workarounds and VPNs, simply to communicate with family members abroad. So the government, cutting off an entire country from the internet, now wants the American public to believe that it's the voice of the people? Are you serious? If the regime actually represented the Iranian people, it wouldn't need to shut down the internet every time there's a crisis. It wouldn't need to silence the public or control information. But the internet blackout actually tells you and the entire world everything we need to know. The Islamic Republic isn't afraid of foreign governments. It's afraid of its own people. And Abbas Araghchi certainly doesn't speak for them. And now let's move on to the bad story of the week, and this one goes to Tucker Carlson, which could be for many reasons, even this week. But I want to hone in on one. This week, Carlson pushed another ridiculous claim about the Middle East that was shot down by none other than his favorite country, Qatar. Carlson bluntly told his audience that Saudi Arabia and Qatar had arrested Mossad agents who were supposedly plotting bombings inside those countries. He presented this claim as evidence that Israel was secretly destabilizing the region, like everything else he claims. Check it out.
It really, really hurts these countries. And Israel wanted to hurt these countries. That's the point. Wanted to hurt these countries. Wanted to sow chaos and disorder because they are rivals of Israel. So it's probably hasn't been reported, but it's a fact that last night in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, authorities arrested Mossad agents planning on committing bombings in those countries. Now, that's weird. That doesn't make any sense. Why would the Israelis be committing bombings in 2 Gulf countries, which are also being attacked by Iran? Aren't they on the same side? No. Israel wants to hurt Iran and Qatar and UAE, and Saudi, and Bahrain, and Oman, and Kuwait.
There's just one problem. The governments involved say that didn't happen. Qatar's foreign ministry publicly rejected the claim and said it had no information about any Mossad operatives being arrested in the country. And what Qatar did announce was something very, very different. Authorities said they detained 10 individuals connected to a network linked to the IRGC. Now, according to reports, the cell was suspected of conducting surveillance and sabotage operations connected to Iranian security services. In other words, the actual story was about Iranian operatives, not Mossad. And this matters because the IRGC, as we've spoken about, has spent decades building proxy networks across the region. Gulf states like Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE have all accused the Islamic Republic of running militant cells and espionage networks inside their borders. Instead of pointing this out, Carlson is again scapegoating Israel with zero evidence and inventing the entire story. That's not just a small error. It fits a pattern that we've seen since before this war even began from Tucker Carlson. Whether it's commentators, activists, or social media personalities, there's a constant effort to shift focus away from the regime in Tehran and towards some supposed Western or Israeli conspiracy. But when you actually look at the facts, the threat networks keep leading back to the same place, the Islamic Republic. This entire week was just another example of that. Now, with that said, I want to move to the final story of this week, the good. This one comes from inside Iran because while the regime continues to try to project strength, what we're actually seeing on the ground is something different. Over the past few days, Israeli drones have been targeting IRGC and Basij checkpoints. These are the places used by the regime to control cities and intimidate Iranians, preventing them from protesting. But that's not something that the IDF is going to tolerate anymore. According to information from sources inside Iran, more than a dozen IRGC and Basij checkpoints have been targeted by drone strikes in just the past 2 days. The resulting damage has been severe, with more than 100 regime operatives being killed and many more injured. But the military damage is only part of the story here. The internal reaction inside the regime's security forces is what really matters at this point. Reports from inside Iran indicate that hundreds of Basij operatives are now refusing to report to their checkpoint positions. Others are abandoning their posts altogether. The regime is struggling to keep these units supplied with basic necessities like food, equipment, and some regime forces who do show up are now sleeping in tents because their bases have been destroyed or are considered too dangerous to use. In other cases, they've been seen moving into schools and mosques. And of course, over the weekend, we also saw videos of them moving checkpoints under bridges to hide from the IDF's drones. When these forces are beginning to panic, hide, or desert their posts, it shows the cracks in the regime's ability to control the country. And that's exactly what sources are reporting. At this point, the fall of the regime is really only a matter of time. Well, that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more updates from across the region and all the latest from the war in Iran. If you have a story that you think I should cover, feel free to reach out to me on social media, Emily K. Schrader, or on Instagram at Emily in Tel Aviv. Until next time, see you right here on Axis of Truth on JNS.
ILTV News, your source for Israel in English. Reporting from the ground where it happens, as it happens. An authentic, trusted voice in daily Israel news. Airing on 11 international TV channels and now launching a 24/7 Israeli news channel. Reaching millions every month across all social platforms. Independent, real, powered by truth. We don't just report, we connect. Thanks to a worldwide community that stands for truth. This is ILTV, your source for Israel in English.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Caleb Ben David, coming to you live from Israel, bringing you all of the biggest headlines from across the region. It's day 24 of the Iran war. Let's take a look at the latest developments. U.S. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and Iran are now engaged in talks to end the war, and he has ordered a delay in attacks on Iran's power infrastructure. Trump tweeted on his Truth Social account, "I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions." Well, in response, Iran's Tasnim news agency cited a senior security official saying there have been no negotiations and there are none underway. Iran's foreign ministry said that Trump's statement was made, quote, to reduce energy prices and to buy time for implementing his military plans. But after revealing contacts with Iran on a possible end to the war, Trump told the CNBC News Network that, quote, "This is regime change." Trump said his assessment is based on the fact that many Iranian leaders have been killed and replaced. He describes the contacts with Iran as great meetings and very intense, but he declined to specify who the U.S. is actually speaking with, saying only they have representatives. Well, Israel's Channel 12 says Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey have been working to buy time following President Trump's ultimatum to Iran over the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this news comes after power cuts were reported in Tehran today as Israel launches waves as airstrikes targeting infrastructure in the Iranian capital. Residents reported widespread blackouts across Tehran following heavy airstrikes this morning. Israel's military confirmed it had targeted infrastructure in the capital, but did not provide further details. The strikes come amid escalating tensions following threats between the U.S. and Iran over potential attacks on civilian infrastructure. On the home front, after a relatively quiet night and morning in Israel that saw only one Iranian rocket alert in central and south Israel, there was a dramatic strike in northern Israel this afternoon, with 2 direct hits reported in Kiryat Shmona. One of the impacts hit a bus, and a man in his 50s was moderately to seriously injured by shrapnel to his head when the rocket struck. The second hit landed on a street between 2 homes. Authorities still working to gather updates from the area. Meanwhile, the IDF chief Eyal Zamir has approved plans to deepen the ground offensive in South Lebanon, warning Hezbollah had made a grave mistake in joining the war. Zamir said the fight against Hezbollah has only just begun, warning the group will be isolated after the war with Iran ends. Now, since Hezbollah entered the war, the IDF struck more than 2,000 targets, including weapons depot, and it's eliminated hundreds of Hezbollah operatives. Air Force strikes on bridges and supply routes along the Litani River are aiming to disrupt Hezbollah weapon flows. Overnight, Israeli Air Forces destroyed the Kasmia Bridge over Lebanon's Litani River, saying it was used by Hezbollah to move weapons and operatives into the south. This is what Defense Minister Israel Katz had to say.
ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו ואני הורינו לצה"ל להשמיד באופן מיידי את כל הקשרים מעל לנהר הליטני שמשמשים לפעילות טרור. וזאת כדי למנוע מעבר של מחבלי חיזבאללה ונשק דרומה, ובנוסף לכך להאיץ את הרס הבתים הלבנונים בכפרי המגע כדי לסכל איומים על היישובים הישראלים בהתאם למודל בית חנון ורפיח בעזה.
And there are reports now of Israel striking another bridge in South Lebanon. Well, that is a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels. Keep up with us on social media, and you can also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. I'm Caleb Ben David, and thank you for watching.
So the difference between Operation Rising Lion in June is that we knocked out and we really rolled back their nuclear program and capabilities. Operation Roaring Lion, which is what we're in right now, is we are targeting the Ayatollah regime that puts the money, that puts the funding, that puts the research into this nuclear program. But we have to talk about the Ayatollah regime a little bit more expansive. We're not just going after their capabilities with their nuclear program, it's their ballistic missile programs, and it's all of their military infrastructure.
Hello and welcome to the ILTV podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, executive editor of ILTV, and I'm so happy to have back our viewers and our listeners. Now, we are still in an ongoing war with Iran, and therefore I've brought today Shosh Bedrosian, the spokeswoman for the Prime Minister's office. Welcome, Shosh.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, Shosh, we are around 3 weeks into this war, and we have been fighting nonstop, and we've also been receiving, of course, missile attacks launched at us from Iran. Very dangerous for the people. At this stage, how is the Prime Minister's office defining victory? When will we be done?
I think it's important to look at all of the victories that we've had since today. And I think we can start with the first one. Since Operation Roaring Lion was launched, within the first 40 seconds of this operation, by the way, a historic operation that we're going through right now, is we eliminated 40 senior Iranian officials. The one of them, the head of the snake, remember, in the first 40 seconds of Operation Roaring Lion, the first strike out, we eliminated the head of the snake, Ali Khamenei, who was the former supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the number one man who exported terrorism across the world, specifically in the region of terror proxies that are surrounding us, the man who wanted to kill tens of thousands of his own people on the streets of Iran, who rose up because they want a better future in their country. This is a man who has been part of this Ayatollah regime for 47 years. And when it comes to Operation Roaring Lion and our objectives here, we know that their ballistic missile program and their nuclear capabilities and their program poses an enormous threat to the state of Israel and the United States. And we need to understand that. We need to realize that, because look what we saw just in June, right? Operation Rising Lion, when the Islamic Republic of Iran launched hundreds and hundreds of ballistic missiles at us, who did it target?
Civilians.
Only civilians, right? Civilians is like their number one goal. They want to annihilate the state of Israel. And we saw that. I remember walking those sites all over central Israel. We know what they're capable of. We know what they say. They call death to America, death to Israel. They mean it. They build it. They say it. And they want it. And that's what they're working for. So in Operation Roaring Lion, we are working to take out this Ayatollah regime that wants to annihilate us. They want to murder us. They want to kill us. Like I said, we've seen it. We need to remove that so that we could have, finally, peace in this region. And so, simultaneously, give the Iranian people an opportunity to take back their future, to take their destiny into their own hands, and to finally have the opportunity to have a democratic society that they have always dreamed of for 47 years.
Well, and Shosh, I think you said it right. Everybody keeps, explaining that airstrikes alone are not going to take out the Iranian regime, and you're certainly, the Prime Minister, the IDF, and the United States together are working very hard to take out the top level and really all the main leaders. We've seen in the last week several more leaders, including of the IRGC, the Basij being taken out as well. But ultimately, we saw in Rising Lion that we did a lot of destruction. Trump said we eradicated the nuclear program of Iran. Now Netanyahu is saying we are crushing the Iranian people. But ultimately, they're able to often reconstitute, and otherwise we probably wouldn't be in another war now, talking again about crushing the nuclear program. So what exactly are we crushing? How do we know that it won't grow back?
Sure. So the difference between Operation Rising Lion in June is that we knocked out and we really rolled back their nuclear program and capabilities. Operation Roaring Lion, which is what we're in right now, is we are targeting the Ayatollah regime that puts the money, that puts the funding, that puts the research into this nuclear program. But we have to talk about the Ayatollah regime a little bit more expansive. We're not just going after their capabilities with their nuclear program, it's their ballistic missile programs, and it's all of their military infrastructure. The only reason why the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Ayatollah regime even has these capabilities is for one thing and for one purpose. What do you think it is? To destroy us. That's it. It's the only reason why they have it. They've been blackmailing us for years with their capabilities. Could you imagine what they would do and how they would blackmail us if they had a nuclear weapon? I also want to just give you some more background as to why Operation Roaring Lion was launched right now. Because the question everyone says is, why at this point in time? Why not a few weeks before when they were annihilating and murdering their own protesters? Why in this very moment? I'll tell you. After our success in Operation Rising Lion in June and knocking out their nuclear capabilities and rolling it back, we saw over the last 6-7 months, in addition to President Trump and the Americans together, we noticed through intelligence that Ali Khamenei was saying things and doing things completely different. The Iranians were negotiating as they believed in some type of fair way, when we know that's not the case. They were continuing to build these programs that's their only goal, of course, to kill us, and the only reason why they wanted to have it. But they were taking these programs, expanding them, and they were digging deeper and deeper with brand new underground bunkers that if we didn't target this infrastructure now, it would become immune to aerial attacks. And the only way for us to really locate and go after them is through aerial attacks, which is what we're doing now. We needed to target this now because if we didn't, in 10 months, in 2 years, in 5 years, 10 years, what would happen? We would be dealing with an Ayatollah regime that had a nuclear weapon. We could not afford to allow that to happen. And I mentioned this before we even started talking. This is really an operation to protect the free world, to protect our values, our democratic values, and also just civilization, what we believe in. President Trump knows this. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said this. He has said this for decades, that we need to go after this regime that calls for this, that creates destruction. And these two forces together have made absolute history. I'll tell you, Operation Roaring Lion is so successful. It's actually more successful and quicker than what we ever thought. We are accomplishing more things than what we actually had intended earlier. And we're at an extremely good point. And like you said today, we have eliminated senior terrorists in the Ayatollah regime who have radiated terrorism throughout the world.
Now, Shosh, when you think about it, though, we've killed senior terrorists many, many times. I look to Hezbollah in Lebanon, for example, where we took out the supreme leader of Hezbollah. We took out most of the leadership of the terrorist regime. And here we are in the midst of this war with Hezbollah launching more rockets than even I think they did in the beginning of the war with Gaza, when they joined the war with Gaza. And we're seeing the north, which had been evacuated back then, and the people were safer, even though they were not in their homes. They just returned a year ago. And here they are getting, rockets shot at them day in and day out, hour after hour. How is it possible that Hezbollah is able to operate the way it is if we did exactly what you described up there?
I want to explain it this way. When you have an infection in your body, and instead of getting the antibiotics, you decide to maybe do a Band-Aid fix. You decide to maybe just put a cream on it or maybe some type of other therapeutic way to deal with it. But if you don't take the antibiotics, you're never going to knock out this infection.
Right.
If we didn't take the head of the snake out, Ali Khamenei, we wouldn't have this opportunity of totally eradicating the Ayatollah regime. He is the head of the snake, and the Ayatollah regime, and now all of his, people that are following him and taking brand new leadership roles, they are all part of the problem. And we have to look at the terror proxies as just an arm of the body, right? We have the Ayatollah regime in Iran, that's the head, and one arm is absolutely, trying to swallow our northern border, which will never happen, of Hezbollah, sits in southern Lebanon, trying to attack our communities every day. The Islamic Republic's other arm is down in our southern area, which is Hamas. And then we have it all the way extended into Yemen, the Houthis, right? It's all one of the same. The Islamic Republic of Iran has created these terror organizations for one reason. There's no coincidence that these terror proxies just happen to surround the state of Israel all in one little area. It's for a reason. It's our destruction. They're committed to our destruction.
So in your estimation, by taking out Khamenei, you're also taking out Hezbollah and Hamas, and that once this regime falls, you will no longer have these proxies operating effectively. I guess if you're brain dead, your arm doesn't function.
That's a great way to look at it. We have to take out the Ayatollah regime to remove all of the other terrorism that surrounds us. The Ayatollah regime, not only do they financially support, they train, they prop up Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. They surround us. And I tell people there's no coincidence. You don't just happen to have terrorist organizations on your back doorstep up just because they formed there. No, they're formed there for a reason. And you spoke about Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, within the first few days of Operation Roaring Lion, they decided to join this campaign against us. You have to look at Hezbollah at it from a specific way. They are not defenders of Lebanon. They have nothing to do with the Lebanese people. They are working to defend the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that's what they chose to do here. And we need to get this terrorism away. We need to get it away from us. And we are attacking it. We are absolutely destroying it when it comes to Hezbollah and in Iran as well, in Tehran.
So, Shush, I mean, you serve as the spokeswoman, and it's been interesting watching the news in the last weeks. A lot of fake news that's been disseminating, a lot of disinformation, including involving the Prime Minister, where there was this video, that said that he had been killed. How seriously, when that video came out, did the government actually take it? And what does it tell you about the power of information or misinformation, the information war that is happening during the time of this physical war?
Sure. There's been misinformation since October 7th took place. Online on a daily basis, we're seeing these social media activists and warriors who they call themselves that, absolutely just trying to dispute the facts of what our people went through on October 7th, what our women and female hostages endured, the sexual abuse, the torture, the starvation that our hostages had to endure for about 2 years. People are trying to fight that and fight the facts. We've seen that. I think we're used to it at this point, and we know how outrageous these claims are. Absolutely so bogus, so outrageous, they're actually offensive because we know what our people went through, and everyone will do what they can to try to discredit the Jewish people, and they have for years. But we know the truth. We are so strong. We have an army that protects us. We have people that protect us. We have leaders like the Prime Minister who stands up and makes extremely bold decisions and moves to protect our world that we have built here in the state of Israel. The incredible technological advancements and the beauty of our country. We stand up to that. In terms of misinformation, it happens. It happens all the time. I think at the end of the day, it's just pretty much, like I said, bogus. The Prime Minister is alive. There's also misinformation that there's some type of rift between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. Absolutely fake news. I can tell you Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, they speak almost every single day. They are working hand in hand together, coordinating every inch of Operation Roaring Lion. I want to share with you a story I heard firsthand from the Prime Minister that before President Trump was reelected for his second term to be the President of the United States, he told the Prime Minister, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. These two leaders have made a decision that is so bold, that is brave, it is heroic, because, like I said, it is defending the free world. It is defending civilization, because if we didn't go after this Ayatollah regime, Europeans would be threatened. We already know that. We saw Cyprus attacked. Other Arab countries are also being attacked. We have to go after this because they want to kill us. They want to kill you and me, Americans. They target bases in the Middle East and beyond. And exporting their terrorism has massacred our people, in addition to Americans too. I also just want to go back into time with history for a moment because it's very important. The first foreign hostages that the Islamic Republic of Iran took, who were they? And I know you know this. Americans. And it took place 47 years ago when the Ayatollah, the first Ayatollah, first came to power. His extremist students took Americans captive in the American embassy in Tehran. And now I want to ask you, who were the last hostages of the Islamic Republic of Iran? On October 7th, our people were the last hostages because Hamas took them. Hamas is just another arm of the Iranian Ayatollah regime. You have Americans first, Israelis last, and this is done. We will not ever allow the Ayatollah regime to have the power and the ability to ever go after our people.
So, I mean, you talk about Netanyahu and Trump working so closely together, and, I'm sure that the rumors, as you said, are exactly that. Rumors, we've heard the president say it, we've heard the prime minister say it, and more than anything, you watch what's going on in Iran, and you understand that America and the U.S. are working lock and step together. But how long do you think that can actually last? Because, there's a different kind of pressure. You and I are both originally American. We know what goes on in the United States, how close we are to the midterm elections in November, and the power of the people who are not necessarily pro this attack in Iran, mostly probably because they don't understand a lot of the things that you just described about the future of America and the impact that Iran actually has on the American people. But is there any concern in the Prime Minister's office that Trump might stop short of allowing this operation to finish because of pressure at home?
These two leaders are going to finish Operation Roaring Lion when the job is finished, when that job is complete. And both of these leaders know what that will look like and when it will take place. And I want to just continue to talk about the objectives, like we said, which is to remove the existential threat we're facing with their ballistic missile program, their nuclear program, but simultaneously to create the conditions for the Iranian people to rise up and take back. The Prime Minister has made that very, very clear, though. It has to come from the Iranians. Once they have this opportunity and this moment, they will know what that moment is, the Prime Minister said. It's up to them. It is up to them. I want to explain it like this. Back in January, there were tens of thousands of protesters that took to the streets across Iran.
But Shush, there are 93 million people in Iran. So tens of thousands is not that many.
But if we go to what just happened in January, right? Mm-hmm. These people that tried to stand up, tens of thousands of people taking to the streets in unprecedented ways. We've never seen this type of this rising up mentality so unified across the country in Iran, right? Yeah. What happened? They were mowed down. They were massacred by this death cult that doesn't want anyone to speak out. They have morality police. They, take away women's rights. There's no freedom of choice, no access to basic needs, right? They keep these people as hostages. Like I said, they were actually the first hostages, but the first foreign hostages were American. The last ones were us, Israelis. They tried to rise up, and they had this existential threat. They had this threat within them that targeted them, that murdered them, and killed them. Imagine if they were to rise up without that threat. What would happen? Maybe there could really be change. The change these people have wanted for so long. The Prime Minister has been speaking to the Iranian people for decades because he knows who they are. They are talented, they are intelligent people, Mayan, and they're brilliant. And they know the future that they could have. They've tasted it. Before the Ayatollah regime, there's so many Jews who have their roots in Persia, but Iran too. I remember hearing stories from Iranians in the United States and here in Israel of the beautiful vegetation and the land they used to roam as kids, and they could wear anything they wanted to wear. And so many Jews actually yearn to just have that taste and have it again, but they can't go back to Iran. So we're so connected to this. But my point is that it'll be up to the Iranians to take matters into their own hands when that moment comes.
Now, Shush, I want to take us back to Israel for just a minute and over to the border with the northern border with Lebanon. So we've been fighting for 2.5 years, against our 7, which is really the 8 front war that we talk about, and we have now sent troops back into Lebanon to do what we're calling a limited ground operation. Why was it necessary to do a ground operation at this stage?
Well, look, we had a ceasefire that was established in 2024 after Hezbollah decided to simultaneously attack us with Hamas after October 7th. We have a ceasefire in place, and the Lebanese government was supposed to demilitarize and be part of the process to get out Hezbollah, who has been holding the Lebanese people hostage. Now we know that for the last 2 years, they've continued to rebuild their own programs and their infrastructure.
But would you blame the Lebanese government for that, or would you say they just were too weak to do it?
I believe that the Lebanese government, they committed to this under the ceasefire, and that's what we have continued to say. They were part of this, and during that ceasefire, the IDF has had to carry out operations to prevent this imminent threat to our northern communities and also our central Israel communities. Because here in central Israel, where we're sitting right now, we actually have had Hezbollah attacks reach us. We've had, rockets reach our location and put us under threat, millions of people here. But when it comes to what's happening with Hezbollah right now, they were supposed to be demilitarized. They were supposed to be weeded out, like I said. Fortunately, we have a Hezbollah who is still defending the Islamic Republic of Iran, connected to the head of the snake. Like I said, they're just the arm. They're the extension of terrorism.
Why the ground invasion now?
The ground invasion is critical because we need to get out this military infrastructure that was built up within the ceasefire. And it is beyond critical because look at what our northern communities are facing right now. Absolutely under attack. We have Kiryat Shmona, one of the, largest communities and cities up there, who has been working to rebuild itself. Now I see it on my phone, all of the notifications of rocket attacks that they're experiencing on a daily basis. These are communities that we've been working to rebuild, have people come back and be in those communities all over again, those beautiful communities, those gorgeous farmland kibbutzim that are on our northern border, even near the Hermon Mountains, in Ramat HaGolan and the Golan Heights. Heights. And we need to get this terrorism out. And the IDF is doing that. We're targeting very specific headquarters, military infrastructures, rocket launchers that, of course, are what's putting us under direct threat on a daily basis here in the state of Israel. But it is critical. We have to get Hezbollah off of our northern border so it does not pose a threat to us. We can't have terrorism sitting on our doorstep.
How long do you, the Prime Minister's office, project that this war in Lebanon is going to take? Will it be even longer than the Iran war?
Well, like you said, it's a limited ground operation right now that needs to take place in order to take out this infrastructure that's critical to Hezbollah. I also want to talk about the strategic weapons that are located in the heart of civilian neighborhoods. And in Beirut, the IDF just released information on the other day. I mean, they're hiding their infrastructure inside of neighborhoods. Where else have we seen something like this?
Gaza.
Correct. They're one of the same, from the head of the snake to the terror proxies. It's a playbook that they all follow.
Do we see this in Iran as well?
We are seeing this in Iran. We're seeing that they are moving infrastructure into civilian neighborhoods, under bridges and roads that civilians use, and in communities. They're one of the same. It's the same playbook, like I said. We have to root it out, and we are absolutely destroying this regime who is conducting all these operations against us and trying to attack us. We are crushing them.
Now, when you talk about Iran and the nuclear weapons program, I think it was Steve Witkoff who said that they came to the first meeting touting the fact that they had enough enriched uranium to create 11 nuclear bombs in a very short period of time. Have we been able to verify that? And do we know where that where that uranium is right now, so that we're sure that if the government, the regime, feels pushed so far against the wall that nuclear weapon won't just come out and attack us?
Well, I'm not going to provide specific details on things like that. But what I can say is that the Iranian regime was saying things in negotiations that we also knew was the opposite was taking place in real life. Like I said, they were building underground bunkers that were even deeper, brand new sites to expand their ballistic missile and nuclear program way beyond than what we might not have been able to manage.
Enriched uranium, because that was a big key. I remember in Rising Lion in June, the concern at the end of that, with all the damage that the B-2 bombers did from the United States and destroying certain, nuclear infrastructures, the ones that they're apparently rebuilding even deeper underground, was that there was some lost uranium, and this was like maybe the same uranium that they were talking about that they still had access to and still had the ability to create a nuclear weapon. Have we found it, and do we know that we're getting rid of it? Because if they have enriched uranium to make nuclear weapons, will it matter if we destroy the rest of the infrastructure?
Without an Ayatollah regime, would there even be an interest in potentially building a nuclear weapon? Remember, the reason why they're building these weapons is to hold it against us. The way that they're actually blackmailing the rest of the world economically, holding everyone hostage because of what they're doing with the Strait of Hormuz. Could you imagine if they had a nuclear weapon and were blackmailing us with that? They're willing to put the economy in a really serious state right now, which we know is temporary. But imagine what they could do if they actually could create something. So in terms of specifics with the enriched uranium, Steve Witkoff pretty much outlines that, what they were saying in negotiations. But what I can share with you is that we know they were saying things and doing completely different things.
And so when it comes to the regime falling, I think there was a lot of belief, or hope, I should say, that when Israel managed to assassinate Khamenei, as you mentioned, in the first 40 seconds of the war, that the regime would just topple because, as you said, he was the head of the snake.
This is a sophisticated Ayatollah regime. They've been creating themselves for 47 years.
Right.
You don't just take something out in one day.
100%. But how... You're saying it has to come from the people. You're saying where Israel and the United States are setting the playing field to ensure that this happens. But a lot of analysts are saying that it won't happen even when we pull out and we've weakened the regime, that it's not going to topple, that there's too many layers there, and that it will take much more time. What is your belief in that? Like, do you feel that the regime is going, because as you said, we can't make it fall. The people have to make it fall. So if we finish the war and we pull out ballistic missiles, we've at least bought ourselves, let's call it a decade or more. The nuclear program is smashed, and there's no more Ayatollahs that we know of that are alive to fill this role. All of the sons and whatever are killed. are we guaranteed that the regime's going to topple? What's to tell you that for sure that's going to happen?
Well, you mentioned layers. We're targeting those layers.
Okay.
We're targeting the layers. We are eliminating the layers as well. We're continuing to target and eliminate these senior officials who are part of this Ayatollah regime to keep their death cult in place, simply. That's exactly what is taking place. And we are crushing and we are battering. Not only are we going after the Ayatollah regime, the figures and the terrorists within that society, we're also targeting their infrastructure, their military infrastructure, absolutely obliterating it. One of the Prime Minister's advisors actually said in an interview just this past week, he said that we are obliterating their infrastructure so hard, we're rolling it back to the Stone Age. We have to do this because it's not just the people, it's what they've built. I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. They say death to America, death to Israel. They've built that. They are that. This regime is that. And we have seen that. And they're working to execute that. We are working to absolutely X all of that out. We're destroying and battering them. I also want to say, I think it's very important, and the Prime Minister has said this over and over again, this is not an operation against the Iranian people. This is an operation against the Ayatollah regime. Because we want the Iranian people to know this could be an opportunity to liberate you. This could be your moment, and we are creating the conditions so you do have the opportunity to take the driver wheel and do what you want with it. But it is up to them, and it will be up to them, and that moment is yet to come.
So let's talk about the day after. The war is over, the people rise up, the regime falls. What is the vision for the region, for the Middle East?
Can you imagine if we had relations with Iran the way that we used to have in the state of Israel, even with trade and the goods and the rich society Iran used to be? They were poets, architects, builders. These were, and they still are, extremely intelligent, brave people. They're very, very talented. And we had relations with them before. We need to build that bridge back up because our societies are very similar. Two ancient civilizations, right? Persia and Judea, which is where we are right now. And our stories, right? Our last holiday for the Jewish people, Purim, takes place in Persia. What are the odds that that is how our story is built and designed, right?
And ultimately, the story of Purim, such a story of the people rising up and being able to take back their country.
Absolutely.
So, Sosh, before we finish, you talk about Iran, but it also impacts the whole region. I think you mentioned how Iran is targeting many of our neighbors. Assuming, again, that this all goes well, we have relations with Iran, trade. What happens to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the others who have no longer joined the peace accords? Do they also come back in some kumbaya moment?
Well, look, we have seen about 12 different Gulf states, Arab countries being attacked by Iran. The Prime Minister has actually said we're seeing a lot of these countries turning to us, wanting to cooperate with us because they see the threat that they are facing. Let's talk about how their civilian population is also being targeted. We've seen hotels on fire after direct missile hits from Iran. We've seen drones hit airports in Dubai. We've seen this. Look at what they're capable of, harming their neighbors that are so close to them. This could change the region. The Prime Minister said that Operation Roaring Lion could usher in an era of peace we have never, ever seen before. And with the help from President Trump, who has recognized this from day one since taking office, seeing Prime Minister Netanyahu's his goal and the importance of it, these two forces are going to create a society in the Middle East of peace we have never seen. And that's the goal here. And this is what could happen. That's what we were hoping. And God willing, that's how this will end. And for the Iranian people, too.
Well, peace in the Middle East is certainly the vision, I think, of all Israelis who have been living for so many years under war. So that will definitely be a Nobel Prize, not only for President Trump, but hopefully for Prime Minister Netanyahu, if all of what you described comes to fruition. Shosh Bedrosian, the spokeswoman for the Prime Minister's office, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Oil prices have just surged in what analysts are calling the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, and most people think they know why. Iran is attacking ships, the Strait of Hormuz is shutting down, the US has started a war, the Gulf is on fire. But what if that's not the full story? What if I told you that there was actually a traitor at play, a man behind the scenes, a country that has been quietly manipulating the crisis, playing every side at once, and benefiting from the chaos, whilst the world focuses in on Iran? A country that presents itself as a Western ally, a mediator, a partner, a country that hosts the largest American military base in the Middle East, and yet may have helped engineer one of the biggest economic pressure campaigns the world has ever seen in hopes of keeping terrorism alive. Yes, I'm talking about Qatar, a state that has spent years mastering the art of geopolitical double-dealing, smiling at Washington whilst funding and protecting the very forces destabilizing the region. And yes, they are directly intervening in this Iran war in ways that many people will not anticipate, because it's being pretended to the world that Qatar and Iran are actually enemies. Many analysts are now claiming that the current oil crisis isn't just the result of Iranian aggression. It might actually be part of a much larger strategy, one designed to spike global energy prices, pressure Western governments, bring them down, and force the United States to end the war. But to understand how this is possible, we need to start with the most important leverage piece of the Middle East, a narrow strip of water that controls nearly 20% of the world's oil, the Strait of Hormuz. And yes, Qatar is behind everything that is going on. Welcome to the Mira K Show on JNS TV. Let's dive right in. For the last 47 years, presidents have been afraid to take on Iran for many reasons, but the main one being their ability to control oil prices and impact the world economy. How do they do this? Well, due to their ability to produce lots of oil, but also because they control the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow checkpoint through which about 20% of the world's oil and a substantial amount of liquefied gas needs to get through to get from the Gulf, the area that holds about half of the world's proven oil reserves, to Europe and Asia. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, and the actual shipping lane tankers used are just a couple of miles across. That means even limited attacks can shut the whole thing down. This control has long been used as a blackmailing tool against Western countries that have tried to sanction Iran, or more accurately, the Islamic Republic. Oil is always in high demand, and if Iran controls the supply line, they can skyrocket the prices internationally by lowering the supply chain or attacking any of the ships providing oil from other locations. You don't even need to sink a ship. Once attacks start, insurance companies will classify the route as a war zone, which means premium will skyrocket overnight and shipping companies will simply refuse to go through. Very simply, the oil economy works as such. Oil is dug up in a few places in the world and then shipped through tight spots like Hormuz to other locations that are lacking oil. It is then turned into fuel and the majority of the world's needs on a daily basis. Driving, flying, building, things you wouldn't even think about. When the supply chain is messed with, like the current war, prices on transporting it skyrocket due to insurance, and it ripples through to everybody's wallet. The fact that Iran controls this location has given them enormous leverage over the years, as messing with the economy is something that most countries try and avoid, and Iran knows this. Over the years, they have used their control of the seas and oils to create havoc and in return, hope that escalation, sanctions, and wars are stopped against them. How do they do this? By attacking ships mainly, but also by threatening to shut the strait. Just that alone can really mess with the oil distribution. And they've done this before. In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, both sides attacked over 500 ships, distributing millions of barrels of oil, and surprise, surprise, they spiked the prices. In 2019, when the people of Iran tried to revolt and the Islamic Republic was sanctioned, they then seized tankers and attacked others in response, hoping that prices will jump and the sanctions would calm down. More recently, they have not been actually shutting the strait, but they've been conducting military exercising, just closing parts of the straits temporarily to remind the world what they are capable of. And so, with the current evisceration of the Islamic Republic by the US over the last few days, it's not a surprise that they decided to threaten and then follow up with almost complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz. What do I mean by this? Well, they are selectively enforcing, allowing limited Chinese and Iranian ships to go through in hopes of strengthening the US enemies, but also to give their allies a reason to defend them. But for the majority of the ships, they have been attacking them with drones, strikes, and even ballistic missiles. From 140 ships a day, the number is now near zero. On March 10th, Iran then launched an even more intense wave of attacks, striking at least a dozen major commercial ships near the strait and attempts to hit American ones as well. They have now also been laying out mines, whilst only about 10 have been confirmed. And they're also working on electronic interferences to confuse ships and their navigation and keeping up the drone activity, making it really difficult for ships to justify going anywhere near there. As of now, 15 to 20 million barrels of oil have been disrupted from their usual routes, and this impact on the economy has driven prices up from about $70 a barrel is about 42 gallons, to over 100, sometimes even hitting 120%. That's more than a 35% increase. This is like a 35% increase, a global tax on basically anything that uses energy. Food production, transportation, shipping, manufacturing. Prices are jumping up to drastically match this new expense. The hope of Iran is that this economic impact will stress people out across the world and that they in turn will push their governments to stop the war. They also know that Trump prides himself on helping the economy and is not interested in a big shakeup, especially as his term ends. So why hasn't the US taken full control of the strait, which seems like the most obvious thing to do? Well, they are trying very hard. They have been attacking Iranian ships at mass. But to truly control the strait, we would need boots on the ground. And that is something that Trump is very uninterested in right now. You would need to clean out the mines, make sure that the entire firing abilities of the Iranian regime is no longer viable, and you would also need naval dominance. Why don't they want boots on the ground? Well, because of the rhetoric in the United States. With 150 injured Americans, they're definitely not interested in endangering more, creating more hatred of this war by the people online who just can't seem to do anything better than be keyboard warriors. Controlling the Strait of Hormuz is a huge part of why the Houthis have been so heavily invested in by the Iranians, and also why we've had basic silence from them. You see, the naval attacks are not interested in becoming a source of attention to the US, thereby suffering their wrath. The Houthis are hoping to kind of go under the radar, go unnoticed, so that they can pop up back soon in the case that the Islamic Republic does actually fall. Because the Middle East is watching carefully. And it's interesting that Hezbollah did not get the memo and did start the war with Israel when they can see how unbelievably strong the response has been. But the Houthis maybe are a little bit more intelligent. That's surprising. I wouldn't have anticipated that. But besides for that, the US is hoping that the Iranian people are really going to be the ones to bring down the regime, so they can control the economy using the strait, and America doesn't have to endanger any soldiers to do that. But time will tell, because if the Iranians keep on doing what they're doing now to the strait, America might need to intervene. But the strait is not the whole story, because Iran isn't just using the strait to apply pressure. They have a bigger strategy, and that is where our friends, the Qatarians, the traitors, come into the picture. You see, Iran has been hoping to create enough havoc in the Middle East that the people themselves, the countries, will apply pressure on the US government. And to do that, they have been striking at energy sources across the Gulf. You've already heard what they're doing. They've hit oil terminals and ports and tankers. In Oman, they hit the gasoline storage tanks. In Kuwait, they went for fuel tanks at the airport and other energy-related sites via drones and missiles. In the UAE, 63% of the attack hits oil, infrastructure, and energy facilities. And in Bahrain, the drones focused on the oil refineries, leading to the state oil company to declare a force majeure of shipments. Of course, the Saudis were attacked with one of the world's largest oil refineries being hit that produce 500,000 barrels of oil and other major desert production sites. Now, these countries in the Gulf have all complicated relationships with the Islamic Republic. And so once Iran took this strategy of just firing wherever they could, it wasn't majorly surprising. They host US bases, and Iran pretended that that's why they were focusing in on these countries. But if you look at the data, it seems less likely that they're focusing in on the army bases and more likely that they're focusing on the energy sources. But that's not the most suspicious thing here, because one of the countries that was attacked felt a little off. Something about it just didn't sit right, given their long history of supporting and collaborating directly with the regime. And of course, I'm talking about Qatar. Oh, Qatar, 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 Qatar. Most people don't even realize that Qatar and Iran actually share the same gas field, the largest natural gas reserve on Earth. Their energy economies are physically connected, and Iran and Qatar tend to be way more aligned than they publicly perform. It then came as a bit of surprise when the IRGC hit the world's largest liquefied gas center in Qatar, who then very quickly responded to this attack, condemning Iran, doing nothing about it, except to say now that the center is shut down indefinitely. The shutting down of this enormous manufacturing site, guess what it did? It sent waves through the economy, and that's not surprising. This is when people started to get a little bit suspicious. You see, the Islamic Republic very much want the war to end, but Qatar are also heavily invested in the survival of the Islamic Republic. Why? Well, Qatar houses the biggest US base in the Middle East, which is here because of the Iranian threat. Why the US chose Qatar, which is so intertwined with Iran, we'll explain in a minute. But the base gives Qatar enormous leverage over the United States. With the threat of Iran gone, the need for this base is gone. What does that do to Qatar's hold over America? But it's also deeper than that. You see, Qatar have funded terrorism and the destruction of the West for years. Billions have been funneled into their campaigns that have been led in part by the Islamic Republic. They work in tandem, one being the good cop, the rich ally in the West, and one being the bad cop. They have no want or interest in their partner in crime disappearing. Qatar has always looked to play both sides of the game. They want to negotiate with Hamas, but also keep Hamas leadership safe, something they're now saying they want to stop doing in hopes of finding favor with the West. They're besties with Iran, but they also house the military base that can destroy them to be besties with the United States, the sworn enemy of Iran. They want the Islamic Republic to continue existing, but at the same time, they also know that this might not be the case. So they want to maintain and develop a stronger relationship with the West. Have you noticed how much nicer Al Jazeera has been lately? And this is why many have come to believe that the attack by Iran on Qatar was actually orchestrated. A genius plan to make it seem like they have become enemies, all the while working together to mess with the economy in hopes of pressurizing the war to end. The manipulation tactics across the US to get Americans to be anti this war, who do you think is pushing that? Qatar. The no boots on the ground, the thing that would give the US control of the strait, that's a narrative pushed by Qatar and Russia and China, of course, who know what a terrible impact that would have on their economies. China uses the strait daily. Qatar have always been the snakes, though. The worst kind. The ones that really seem like friends. They have so much economic leverage that the West falls for it. Their glitz and their glam. But from what I understand, Trump was not very impressed when he learned about this double crossing. And if we know anything about Trump, it's that he does not forgive or forget very easily. Now, from this whole story, Qatar pretending Iran's actually attacking them to actually create economic havoc so that Iran war stops and US feel the pressure to pull out, there are a few things that have really become a little bit clear to me. Number one, the US and Qatar need to end their special relationship. I understand the keep your friends close but your enemies closer thing, but no more can Qatar be allowed to leverage the US. They are nothing short of a terrorist country. Can we all just please normalize that? Number two, Iran needs to be cut out completely, and we must not stop the war until the Republic is completely done. Not just for Israel, but for the US and the Middle East as a whole. If Qatar are suddenly willing to be best buddies and kick out terrorist leadership at the thought of the Islamic Republic being gone, think of how much dynamics will change if they really are completely removed. Anything less than that will just bring us to Iran 3.0, a few years down the line, but this time with nuclear abilities and even more control of the strait. Number three, the mentality of the West to hope for the best when it comes to imperative things to our survival is a lesson we must never forget. It doesn't work. Oil cannot be controlled by terror regimes. If they can hold things above our heads now, how much worse can it get with time? Pretending something isn't just a long-term issue just because immediately we can find a solution is bad policy. Qatar is playing the world and will continue to do so after Iran is gone. They are and have always been the biggest threat. Let's not kid ourselves anymore. They have money galore. They have resources that never end. They have manipulation strategies that are unrivaled. And they look tempting. They don't feel like terrorists. They seem educated and normal and rich and sophisticated and like somebody you want to befriend. But it's the type of friend that stabs you in the back at any opportunity. And they can't be allowed to act like this. If we really want to change the Middle East once Iran is done, Qatar needs to be dealt with next. Let's not pretend. Iran was enemy number 1, but Qatar is enemy number 2. And it's all part of the same enemy, wrapped up in a beautiful Middle Eastern Islamist bow. I'm Ira Kay, and I will see you next time.
And at a time when Israel is facing such profound security challenges, and we see the celebrations and support worldwide, the Jewish National Fund USA has also mobilized its nationwide strategic ecosystem of infrastructure to support communities in Israel from the Negev to the Galilee. Joining us now is Russell F. Robinson, CEO of the Jewish National Fund USA. Russell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So what are you seeing on the ground right now? You know, how are American Jews stepping up to help?
So this is just 3 days into this emergency, and it was over Shabbat. But I can tell you that we have already mobilized thousands of our leaders across the United States, from young to old, who have already started making phone calls, sending out information. We're having Zoom information systems and sessions, and already are having hundreds of people coming on and asking what can they do. We happen to have an American high school that is in Israel right now, so we have some teenagers that are in Israel. We have 2 groups of people who've come on JNF trips, a volunteer trip, a brotherhood trip. They're there. We're monitoring all of that. But at the same time, our staff is as well throughout Israel, is monitoring in the north and south. Already we have supplied from Mitzpeh Ramon emergency vehicle. We're already working with the people in the northern part of Israel for what they need. And in the Arava, we're already getting the request. But one of the exciting and proud parts of the Jewish National Fund USA is that we say we were there yesterday and we are there today. So when this happened, we already started setting up our situation room, and we're acting and moving forward.
And so as this moment continues to unfold, as you said, only 3 days in, I mean, what are you seeing that Israel needs most from the American Jewish community, especially in the weeks and the months ahead, depending on how long, of course, this operation will last?
Well, we're seeing the terrible incursions of missiles that have hit there, and we're going to have to take that assessment. I know that Beersheba just in the past hour was hit, and it's something very close to us. We opened up last time that Beersheba was hit. We opened up our high school in our Beersheba campus and had over 12,000 people processed through. So we're prepared to be there, number one. And so a lot of it is going to be assessment following. PTSD, all of the issues that we have faced because of October 7th till today are very, very, very real. And Jewish National Fund USA has been part of building resilience centers in the north and in the south of Israel and being there for the people. So we're going to be standing up, being prepared. We're going to be prepared to sending our people to Israel. We sent over 8,000 people on volunteer trips. And as soon as it's available, we're going to be starting to send our people. They want to be there. Medical supplies, helping them with all of their needs that they have. And I will tell you, one of the effective ways that we're trying to show is that we have to show Israel that we're standing with them, every single day, more than just financially, that we're really acting and doing something. And Jewish National Fund on April the 24th has a Shabbat for Israel. We did it last year. Thousands of homes invited people to come into their homes. April the 24th. Come online, sign up, have people over to your house for Shabbat for Israel, and tell the real story about the people of Israel.
Absolutely. I mean, it's incredible, and especially as you mentioned, and I think we talked about this in our broadcast yesterday, is that Israel seems to be one of the only countries in the world where people want to fly in during wartime, and it's incredible. The JNF USA is also on the ground and ready and waiting to bring its volunteers into Israel in the midst of a war. So I do want to ask, is it a challenge to respond to this, to such rapid changes on the ground in Israel? I know you did this after October 7th. What can you tell us about that and how you're responding now?
So, Lidar, it is so unbelievable. I say this every single day. The only limitations we had of people coming to Israel was flights. We didn't have an issue of people. We had an issue of planes and seats on the plane. Because we were, taking 250 people in one time, and then the next time we only could take 50 or 75, only because of planes, seats on the plane. So we have to logistically make sure we work with our affiliates. We have an ecosystem that we work with. We don't try to recreate the wheel. So we work with our ecosystem. We work with people who work with farms and work with helping people and the farmers. We're helping to rebuild people's homes. When we want to go down to Beersheba, it may be just serving and having parties for people to give them the respite that they need. It may be going down to the Arava and helping them with all the work, or going up in the northern part of Israel. And I can tell you story after story of parks that we were just recreating and building from the ground up with our volunteers, who I assure you have never built a park at home, but they came all the way to Israel at their cost, at their time, leaving their families, 8,000 of them. And that is really the secret sauce of the Jewish National Fund, is our people in Israel, our people here.
Absolutely. And I do want to hear actually some of these stories. What can you tell us? Maybe give us a story, share with our viewers a little bit about sort of the support, any, specific story that really touched you in terms of the help that you've given to communities in Israel, because you've been doing incredible work from the north to the south.
So I'll tell you, I'll try to give two quick stories. One, I could deal them all over, but I could tell you in the north, we had a group in Kiryat Shimona. The people of Kiryat Shimona were just coming back home, and they were building a park and cleaning out people's homes. I want you to imagine, these are people who flew all the way to Israel to come to people's homes, put new sheets on their beds, to wash their walls. They left for 17, 18 months with 24 hours notice, and they were cleaning it up. And they were working in a park, and this two gentlemen came driving up in their car, pulled out of their car, asked, who is this? Who is this? And then started crying and talking about their children coming back home, and to know that somebody from America is coming to build a park here in Kiryat Shimona. They couldn't believe it. And then we just opened a soft opening of our Galileo Culinary Institute literally 2 weeks ago. It's not going to be officially opening for a couple months, but we invited all the people in the north to come to this not 5-star facility, Lidar. It's an 8-star facility in the middle of Kibbutz Gonen, right by Kiryat Shimona, a culinary institute. Now, what is the difference of a culinary institute? It gave pride and belief that, by the way, the north is reimagining and coming back. And when the people walked in and the mayors all walked in, and they're walking into a facility and they're crying, not because of just coming together, but that they know that we are standing with them like we did yesterday, today, and that we built such a facility for tomorrow. They believe in tomorrow because we believe in tomorrow with them.
Incredible work that your organization is doing. Russell Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Idar, thank you. And again, remind everybody, April 24th, Shabbat for Israel. Come on, jnf.org, sign up. All around the world, we've got from Australia to England, everywhere coming on. Let's get tens of thousands of people, invite people over, and tell the real story of the land and people of Israel.
Absolutely. April 24th, to all of our viewers, April 24th. Remember that date. Russell, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Caleb Ben David, coming to you live from Israel and bringing you all of the biggest headlines from across the region. It is day 24 of the Iran war, and let's take a look at the latest developments. President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and Iran are now engaged in talks to end the war, and that he has ordered a delay in attacks on Iran's power infrastructure. Now, Trump tweeted on his Truth Social account, "I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had, over the last 2 days, very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of those in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue through the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions." Well, in response, Iran's Tasnim news agency cited a senior security official saying, quote, "There have been no negotiations and there are none underway." And Iran's foreign ministry said Trump's statement was made, quote, "to reduce energy prices and to buy time for implementing his military plans." But speaking to reporters before flying off to Memphis, President Trump doubled down on his claim that the U.S. is in negotiations now with Iran. He declined to specify which officials in Iran the U.S. is in contact with, but did say it was not the new Supreme Leader, Mujtaba Khamenei. Here is Trump.
We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement. So the discussions took place yesterday. They went into yesterday evening. They want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal too. We're going to get together today by probably phone, because it's very hard to find a country. It's very hard for them to get out, I guess. But we'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Who is Steve Witkoff speaking with, Mr. President?
A top person. Don't forget, we've wiped out the leadership phase 1, phase 2, and largely phase 3. But we're dealing with the man who I believe is the most respected and the leader. It's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
Is that the Supreme Leader?
No, not the Supreme Leader. We don't. Well, nobody heard of the second Supreme Leader, the son.
Are these direct?
Nobody. We have not heard from the son. Every once in a while, you'll see a statement made, but we haven't. We don't know if he's living.
Now, Israeli media has been quoting an Israeli official saying the talks were not a surprise to Israel, and that official said that the Iranian figure that the U.S. is in contact with is the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bakir Kalibaf, who is previously seen as a hardline figure. And Israel's Channel 12 also saying that Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey have been working to buy time following President Trump's ultimatum to Iran over the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this news comes after power cuts were reported in Tehran earlier today as Israel launched waves of airstrikes targeting infrastructure in the Iranian capital. Residents reported widespread blackouts across Tehran overnight following heavy airstrikes this morning. Iran's military confirmed it had targeted infrastructure in the capital, but did not provide further details. And on the home front, after a relatively quiet night and morning in Israel that saw only one Iranian rocket alert in central and south Israel, there was a dramatic strike, unfortunately, in northern Israel this afternoon, with 2 direct hits reported in the town of Kiryat Shmona. One of the impacts hit a bus, and a man in his 50s was moderately to seriously injured by shrapnel to his head when the rocket struck. The second hit landed on a street between 2 homes. Authorities are still working to gather updates from the area. Well, for the latest, let's go to our Mayan Hoffman, who is out in the field in the Tel Aviv area. Mayan, what can you tell us about that strike in Kiryat Shmona?
Yeah, thank you, Paula. So just a couple of hours ago, not even, we had these direct strikes after, as you described, a very quiet day throughout the country. Obviously, there were some sirens overnight and into the morning, a little bit of damage, nobody injured, and people were feeling pretty secure. But then these strikes took place. Now, Kiryat Shmona is a city in northern Israel that has been struck many, many times. I would just want to take you back to the October 8th when Hezbollah started bombing the northern cities. Kiryat Shmona was one of the hardest hits. I myself was up there many times and saw massive craters, apartments with windows blown out. People just returned to their homes March a year ago, and here they are directly under fire again. Now today with these two direct hits, we've seen some images of the bus that was where one of the rockets struck down, the windows completely shattered. The driver also appeared at Rambam Hospital to get some treatment. We know that in one of the other attacks, we know there was a direct hit, as you mentioned, between two homes on a street. There's an 80-year-old injured in one of the other attacks. He's more mildly injured. And the other individual in his 50s was moderate to severely injured, shrapnel to his head, taken immediately from Magen David Adom to the hospital for treatment. That's what we know now. The president of the state of Israel was just now visiting that site, and we're starting to see some statements come out from him. Again, this is an area where Hezbollah has been targeting for really the better part of the last 2.5 years. We signed a ceasefire in November 2024. But, since then, Israel has been carrying out periodic strikes to try to keep the calm. But since Hezbollah joined this war, Kiryat Shmona has been one of the hardest hit.
And just picking up on your comment, Mayan Hoffman, staying with you. We're going back to Mayan Hoffman. Staying with you, just to pick up on your comment about that, it's been a relatively quiet day, or even 24 hours, I would say, in Israel. I don't know there's a direct connection, but there are people who are going to maybe start drawing a connection between whether that is somehow connected with this news coming out of the U.S. that there are these peace talks going on with between the Iran and the U.S.
That Trump said, for example, that he's going to hold off targeting important energy and other infrastructure in Iran for the better part of the next 5 days. That could cause Iran to take pause as well and try to maintain that kind of calm. Certainly, they don't want to be attacked as well. And the more they attack here, the more Israel and the United States are going to be forced to attack over there. Now, we heard Trump's comments you played at the beginning of the show where he's quite confident in the fact that negotiations are taking place. We also know that Iran said that those negotiations were not taking place, and it's very unclear exactly what is going on. We still don't have a formal update as to what negotiations are happening, how they're happening with. You mentioned the person that, leaks are saying that the United States team is talking with. We don't know the effectiveness of this individual. And I also just want to highlight, that this statement came out at the beginning of trading this week. The neft prices, the oil prices started to drop. We saw the stock market start to go up. This obviously is also something that Trump needs to ensure that there's not tremendous economic impact on the United States. So it's unclear how much of this is true or false or to impact the economy in the United States. We also know that Israel wants to take this to the end. And there's a lot of analyses, and analysts talking about the idea that what will happen if Trump decides to end the war quicker than Israel. We have several goals. Netanyahu outlined them for us this morning. Obviously stopping the nuclear and the ballistic capabilities of Iran, but as well as to enable the people to overthrow this very, very dangerous regime. And the question is, when are we going to be done with those goals? Is it today? Are we ready to stop now? It's a question mark that many people would say no, and certainly I would say here in Israel.
Right. Big questions. We'll be discussing them more with some of our expert analysts in just a few minutes. But meanwhile, Mayan Hoffman there out in the field in Tel Aviv. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And staying focused on the northern front, IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir approved plans to deepen the ground offensive in southern Lebanon, warning Hezbollah it has made a grave mistake for joining the war and remaining a central proxy of Iran. Zamir says the fight against Hezbollah has only just begun, warning that the group will be left isolated after the war with Iran ends. Now, since Hezbollah entered the war, the IDF has struck more than 2,000 targets in Lebanon, including weapons depots and rocket launchers, and eliminated hundreds of Hezbollah operatives. Air Force strikes on bridges and supply routes along the Litani River, aiming to disrupt weapons flows southward. Overnight, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Kasmia Bridge over the Litani, saying Hezbollah used it to move weapons and operatives into the south. Now, Defense Minister Israel Katz said the strike follows orders to destroy all bridges over the Litani and also to accelerate demolitions of Lebanese homes that are close to the Israeli border. Here's Katz.
ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו ואני הורינו לצה"ל להשמיד באופן מיידי את כל הקשרים מעל לנהר הליטני שמשמשים לפעילות טרור. וזאת כדי למנוע מעבר של מחבלי חיזבאללה ונשק דרומה, ובנוסף לכך להאיץ את הרס הבתים הלבנונים בכפרי המגע כדי לסכל איומים על היישובים הישראלים בהתאם למודל בית חנון ורפיח בעזה.
And staying with the Northern Front, an IDF investigation has concluded that Ofer Moskovitz, the 60-year-old resident of Kibbutz Mizgav Am, who was killed near the Lebanese border on Sunday morning and laid to rest today, died as a result of misfired Israeli artillery shelling and not by a Hezbollah rocket as was originally believed. Now, the IDF says the artillery fire in that area was intended to assist Israeli troops operating across the Lebanese border, but several of the shells fell short, killing Moskowitz. Now, the IDF says it has found several, quote, severe issues and operational errors in the incident. It has apologized to the family of Moskowitz and said it would continue its investigation and draw all the necessary conclusions when it was completed. And due to the ongoing security situation, Israel has now cut Ben Gurion airport traffic to 1 flight per hour and also slashed passenger limits. Transportation Minister Miri Regev and senior officials have ordered further restrictions at Ben Gurion, reducing outbound passengers from 120 per flight to about 50 per flight and cutting overall flight activity. The new measures to take effect overnight will allow only 1 departing and 1 arriving flight per hour, halving available flights and deepening the shortage of outbound flights. Now, the move follows early restrictions after interception debris damaged some private planes at the airport last week and comes as Ben Gurion continues to operate under strict security protocols amid the ongoing conflict. Well, joining us now for more on all these issues is Dr. Nir Baimes, who is a Middle East expert at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle East Studies at Tel Aviv University, and Reserves IDF Major Elliot Chodorf. He's a political and military analyst based in the north of Israel. Nir, I have to start with you. I want to start with you about this announcement by President Trump, which, understating matters to say, it certainly came as a surprise to most of us here in Israel, maybe not some officials. Some Iranian sources are denying it, but other reports claiming it's the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament. I just want to get a sense of where you think the truth lies in these claims.
We've been hearing in the last few days that a channel of mediation is emerging with the intervention of countries like Turkey, Pakistan, and Egypt. This is not a major surprise, considering the dynamics of war. The notion of total victory, broadly speaking, became a bit more difficult. We've seen it in our own fronts. And there is always a window that is not unlimited for the length of a given war. And therefore, there are some also attempts to limit damage. We've seen a war that moved very quickly into 12 different fronts. We've seen the recent debate about additional bombing of energy and power grids and infrastructures that by itself are civilians on the one hand, and on the other hand are very much related to the energy market. That's an attempt to say, well, let's perhaps limit the scope of damage that thereafter we will need to fix. Let's limit the damage to the energy market itself. And then perhaps let's recalibrate the goals of what can be achieved and try to work out a channel in where we will be able to say, or where the president will be able to say, as he said in one of the statements, well, we may see a regime change. It may not be the regime change that some had imagined, but it's going to be a regime change in the sense that something significant is going to change. That's at least the line that we hear right now. Of course, the Iranians will have to agree to it as well, and at some point there needs to be some public statements and some actual meetings, which I think at this point it's mostly indirect talks, but it's nothing to be surprised about considering just the timeline of events.
Right. And Elliot, even while all this potentially is happening between Washington and Tehran, we see the Northern Front heating up at the same time. Maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but if we are looking at some kind of at least wind down of the war with Iran, and certainly Israel wouldn't continue with that battle against Iran if the United States determined that it was time to end it. Where does that lead the war in the north, the war of Israel against Hezbollah, which only seems to be accelerating?
I think the Northern Front is not necessarily attached to the Iranian front. The dynamic there is a little different. And there is a scenario, there is even a scenario in Iran where Israel will act independently or separately from the United States. There is certainly a scenario as such in Lebanon. It may be that part of the agreement or the looming agreement will attempt to create a linkage. But I think what's more interesting is that in Lebanon, you also have an actual statements and offer for going to direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon for a ceasefire, but separately from the terms or the potential terms and whether some of the recent statements about the Lebanese military really going against Hezbollah, implementing 1701 or collecting all the arms. This is a major departure from the traditional line. Lebanon, a country that does not, that has a ban on speaking with Israelis, that had again broken it in January for the first time in 40 years when you had two officials from both countries meeting. Now we have the president of Lebanon saying, let's go to direct negotiations. Let's not put this aside for a second, because this is very significant. This potentially is a major departure from a line that was there for over 4 decades. And this is certainly a very brazen statement in the context of the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, where basically the statements are saying, no, we need to choose Lebanon or Hezbollah. And we're willing to say now that perhaps this is a clearer choice. We're willing even to leave the ban on Israel away to recognize a negotiation channel. That by itself is an opportunity, separately from Iran and separately from the campaign against Hezbollah, because it may open some additional opportunities and some additional channels on the Northern Front.
All right. Well, actually, I had asked that question to Elliot, but I'm glad you spoke up, because you did paint I won't say an optimistic picture, but you certainly raised some possibilities in saying that we see some changes in the Lebanese government that lead potentially away to a kind of settlement resolution. But Elliot, I want to get then your response. First of all, just your view of the overall situation, but maybe specifically respond to how much of Nir's analysts you agree with there.
First of all, I do agree with Nir. I think that there's a change in the situation, and certainly that the war with Hezbollah is connected, but not completely so in the sense of Iran. In other words, there are two separate campaigns with a connection between them. Your question actually was, are we seeing an escalation? And I don't think we are. I think what we're seeing is Hezbollah recovering somewhat from the shock of the opening days and sort of settling into its own routine. Let's also keep in mind that their original, I'm talking about pre-2023, their original doctrine called on firing 4,000 rockets a day into Israel. So what we're seeing today is a tiny, tiny fraction. I don't belittle it. And the damage and the injuries and deaths are certainly nothing to belittle. But if we look at the scale of what they wanted to do and the scale of what they are capable of doing today, we understand how much they've been weakened. So once again, not so much an escalation. I think it's more they've settled into a firing routine.
But Elliot, can I just say, when I did say escalation, I also referred to Israeli actions in the sense that we see operations like bombing the bridges over the Litani, or now the Defense Minister Katz talking about demolishing homes in South Lebanon and the border. So there definitely seems to be an intensification in terms of the Israeli operations.
Yes. Look, the Israeli operation is stepping into its own also. In other words, forces are still being moved to the north. There's the threat, and I think it's a credible one, of a major maneuver on multi-divisional level into South Lebanon. Those forces aren't all there yet. I believe that one of the delays has to do with the weather. You know that we're in the middle of a rainy weather system that's not unusual but rare for this late in March and going into April. Muddy ground is not good for mechanized maneuver. So I think we're seeing a bit of a delay on that for all sorts of reasons in their own right. The plan, as it seems to be, and I take all public statements with a grain of salt, but the plan, as it seems to be, is to isolate the south, the area from the Litani River to the Israeli border has always been problematic. We can go back to the 1970s when Fatah was there, and all the way up until today. Even after the previous round and the so-called ceasefire agreement, which never really held, Hezbollah was bound by that agreement not to return to the south, not to bring forces or weapons back in. Our forces there now are finding weapons in places that they know they cleaned out the last time. In other words, they were brought in during the period of the ceasefire. The only way to assure that area is completely closed off to Hezbollah is to isolate it, which is what's being done with the destruction of the bridges, and to move sufficient force in there. A final point, and here, coming back to something Nir said, and I agree with him, we see a shift in the Lebanese government. I don't think it's a shift in attitude. I think it's a shift in opportunity. In other words, I think that the Lebanese government would always have liked to get rid of Hezbollah. They never had the opportunity because Hezbollah was stronger than the Lebanese army, and we're in the process of degrading that, giving the Lebanese government the opportunity to make the statements that it's making now.
Right. And Nir, come back to you. President Trump mentioned regime change. You referenced it too. But that seems, when we're talking now about regime change, at least President Trump seems to be suggesting it just simply replacing the figures at the top of the regime with other figures from the regime, potentially the speaker, for example, of Iran's parliament, who is seen as a hardliner. So I ask you, how much of a change you think in fundamental attitude can there come from that kind of regime change, even if Iran agrees to something, sort of limited goals like reopening the Strait of Hormuz or even removing the enriched uranium from some sites there? How much can we expect any member of this regime to change things like the ballistic missile program, or especially Iranian support for terror proxies like Hezbollah, as we've been talking about, as well as the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, etc.?
Well, Caleb, it's a little difficult to say at this early stage. Broadly, the regime change that many here would have, what we're speaking about, had to do with changing the system. Changing the system of the Wilayat al-Fiqh, the religious clearly rule, the Revolutionary Guard, and the system, which really dominated Iran since 1979 for 47 years. The protesters that went to the streets wanted a change in the system, not a change in the leadership. What we're speaking about now is a different scenario where a leadership is forced to make some moves and overtures in a different direction, and where many of the instruments it had, certainly in the context of military assets, factories, installations to manufacture missiles, are also broadly gone, at least until the reports. But of course, I'm not sure that we understand really how successful were all these campaigns. Where they were very significant, but we're not sure that all the abilities were neutralized. As we've seen, there's still missiles flying. So there's certainly a gap here, and I think there's also a gap here between what Israel would have wanted to see and what the US is willing to see. But if you're trying to find the optimistic line here, it could be that it's not the end, because there's maybe another phase in where the Iranian people will also have to say, what is it that they see? Maybe we will see something else in the streets. Maybe we will see some friction inside the Iranian circles, those who will agree to negotiation, those who will not agree to negotiation. So this is a little early, but certainly what we're seeing now is that the United States is willing to go to a route that really brings a ceasefire, that narrows the goals of the war, and willing to speak about regime change in terms that would be a little different than the way we've introduced them at the beginning.
Yeah, there's quite a few maybes in there. So I have to ask Elliot if, in fact, regime change is downgraded to, as Nir puts it, not a change in system, but a change in the leaders coming from that previous old system. Even if there's some certain strategic goals, and there's no question the degrading of Iranian military capabilities is a strategic achievement of this conflict. But if it still leaves us with one of the hardliners, so to speak, in power, one of the old regime, is that impact on certainly the perception of U.S. and Israeli deterrence in the region?
If the regime stays in power, this idea of moderates versus extremists, hardliners versus pragmatists, is all Western smoke and mirrors. The regime is made up of Khomeiniist hardliners who vary within that frame of more or less, and they're committed to an ideology going back to Ayatollah Khomeini and his writings that are the underpinning of the regime, published in English as a book called Islamic Government. There is no soft line in the Islamic Republic of Iran. So what we're likely to see, yes, there's been a strategic advantage for Israel and for the United States in weakening Iran. But if we're looking down the road, and history of the past 4.5+ decades is any indicator, they're going to start cheating on day one. And what we're going to see is a slow but sure progression back to where we started from. We can't predict how long it'll take. There are a lot of variables, a lot of factors involved. But 3, 5, 7 years down the road, I think we'll be right back in the same place that we started.
Well, I think that you're kind of answering my question, say that is perhaps a setback for Israel if we don't see that kind of regime change. Anir, I have about a minute left. You agree with that?
I very much agree with this. The problem with the Iranian system was the Iranian system. It wasn't one individual or another individual. We have taken down over 40 senior leaders. But the system, if it remains the same system, we'll have a chance after the 12th Day War and now the 26th Day War. There's a chance that a few years down the road we'll have the 36th Day War. And I think some of our partners in the Gulf are also very concerned about that, to make sure that if there's going to be a change, it's going to be a really systematic change, not just a change in leadership. And hopefully, if there's going to be a negotiation path, that's going to be a push to make sure that a change in the system of Iran will be implemented, not just in the leadership.
All right, gentlemen, but I guess we're currently now at the mercy of President Trump in terms of he's going to be the decider on that. And we'll just have to see in the next few days if his direction that he's taking this war is going to lead to any of the changes that I think we all agree that we want to see. Elliot Chodoff, Dr. Nir Baums, thank you for joining us. And that is a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel and all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels. Keep up with us on social media, on all our platforms. And of course, you can also catch us on Screen IL with 24/7 live coverage. I'm Caleb Ben David. Be well, and thank you so much.
The Army's keyword, I think, is bureaucracy, like any organization. And the war's keyword is right now. If you need something now, maybe in 30 minutes, they'll be too late. So they were there to get them an extension cords for electricity. They were there to get them, God forbid, blankets and sheets because Zaka didn't have enough body bags.
The Nosh with your host Kosher Guru here on ILTV. Boom shakalaka. We have an amazing episode for you today as we talk to Dror Chobelsi from Shuva Achim, all the way from the spot where you want to go volunteer and say thank you to our soldiers and what he created. We're going to hear from Dror today. Dror, welcome to the Nosh.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.
How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing amazing. Thank God. How are you?
Good to see you.
Dror, let me ask you a question. You grew up here in Israel. You are doing so much chesed. We're going to go into and discuss how you started and what you are doing and continue to do on a daily basis. Did you ever think you would be doing what you're doing now growing up?
Honestly, it was a big part of my life always. I don't feel like I do something that I have never been before. I never did before.
Explain to me, growing up, what did you do to give back? What did you do to do some chesed, some kindness in your community?
I'll start with just being my mom and my dad's kid. Really, for them, ever since I know myself, it was even if you won't get good grades in school, okay, don't study, I don't care, but be a good person. When you see someone needs something, help him. When your house will be the house of Avraham Avinu, because Grandpa's house was the house of Avraham Avinu, and my mom's house is the house of Avraham Avinu. So she's always, and your house will be the house of Avraham Avinu.
Okay, talking about the house of Avraham Avinu and doing chesed, it's an unfortunate thing, but so many of us continue to talk about it today and have to talk about it because the world must know the truth. October 7th changed your life. Of course, it changed so many lives around Israel and the world, but October 7th changed your life. Where were you on October 7th and 8th, and what did you start doing and where?
So, I was in Nativot, okay, spent Shabbat with my family. Nativot is in the south. Actually, a Shabbat that I had a girlfriend back there, and we decided to keep that Shabbat. I wasn't keeping Shabbat before. I was actually big on the nightlife scene in Israel. I've been to a few Nova festivals before, and that Shabbat we came back from Sinai, from Egypt. She said, "Let's keep Shabbat." I said, "Yeah, why not?" We already stopped smoking on Shabbat, and it was a nice progress. And 6:20 a.m. sirens and booms, and everything gets crazy, and you open up your phone because something is clearly not usual. And then you open the TV and you really understand what's happening. I had a lot of friends in the Nova Festival, started getting messages and locations. We have a sister that lives in Kfar Aza, that it was, we tried to aim some troops towards their house to help them. That's how it really started for me, or for us as a family, to see what we can do and how we can help. At the same time, my brother Kobe, who lives in Shuva, in Moshav Shuva, it's in Otef, understood somehow that the junction is turning slowly to a field hospital. That was the only safe junction. You can land a helicopter or stop the ambulances in order to evacuate the wounded from 232 to that junction, Shuva's junction, and from there to do all the triage and send them to the hospitals. Kobe ran to the junction with his friends, with a folding table, with some food and drinks, and then it's really starting.
That's when it really started. But just you mentioned your sister who lived in Kfar Aza. How is your sister? Did anything happen?
We'll give a nice closure to this. Thanks God, Sunday around 12 p.m., they released her from her house. They were fighting over the door with the terrorists. Her son, the terrorists shut the door.
Oh, wow.
The bullet hit her son Iftach's hand, but also broke the handle. And then they couldn't fight over the handle anymore, the terrorists. And they just left the house for some reason. They didn't burn it like they did to most of the houses the people fought. They didn't burn the house. And thanks God, they saved Sigal Yacobi, Sigal and Ronen.
Okay, so thank God they're okay.
Thank God they're...
Just want to make sure because I did not know that part of the story. So now let's go back to the Shuva Junction.
Now,
this is your cousin now?
My brother Kobe.
Your brother Kobe set up a table.
Set up a table with his friends, two of them doctors. They came to help the medical team. More people came with this guy brought some chairs. This one got some little bit of food. But then it's really starting to be there to help now. You know, in the army's keyword, I think, is bureaucracy, like any organization. And the war's keyword is right now. If you need something now, maybe in 30 minutes, they'll be too late. So they were there to get them extension cords for electricity. They were there to get them, God forbid, blankets and sheets because Zaka didn't have enough body bags. Sunday, we understood Kobe, even the end of Shabbat, but Sunday we understood he's still there. And he tells us the soldiers coming with a small backpack with 2 shirts, 2 underwears. They don't really know what's happening in the area. And then we joined. Me with 2 friends, with my brother Ariel, going to stores in Netivot, if it's to buy shirts and underwears and towels and grocery shopping, to throw a quick shakshuka or a sandwich. My brother Eliran in Ramat Gan is doing all the shopping from suppliers. More shirts, more stuff. We tell them what we need. Every day he drives down from Ramat Gan to Netivot.
So in the beginning, when you and your brothers are now going to the stores, you're trying to buy clothing, you're trying to make shakshuka, which you need to buy ingredients, tomatoes, and other things to make the shakshuka. Who's paying for all this? How are you affording this in the beginning?
We're doing it 100% from us. That's how we started. No one thought of people that'll come to Israel to volunteer or to donate or stuff like that. You couldn't fly to Israel at the start of the war. So we just started. Thanks God. I don't know, I have my own Instagram, and I know social media is a part of my life. So somehow you start posting and you start asking people, maybe people want to help. So you do beat and pay box. It's like Zelle and Cash App. And it really grows every day. First, the numbers of the soldiers are growing. Road 25, the road we're on, it was the only entrance to Otef Aza for over a month. For, let's say, a month before they... because they blocked all the other roads right on October 7th. You couldn't find in the area, not even a gas station. Because of the rockets, they empty all the gas stations, so they won't explode, and they close the stores. You cannot even have coffee. Shuvas Junction, our place, became the only spot to have a cup of coffee, to eat something, to grab a snack. It took the army long time to provide the first war meal. Okay, over a month.
We have to just take a step back to understand. Everybody out watching the show has to understand that Shuva Achim has turned in today an amazing opportunity, but not only opportunity, an amazing place where Doron and his brothers have built an entire area. It's almost like a respite center where you could come and get food, drink, clothing, just chill and relax. I want Jordan to go into it a little bit more because you're like telling us October 8th, just a table, and now you're saying everything else going on over there.
Yeah.
You have to tell us how you started from the table and how you progressed and built it out over time.
So first, when there's a need for us, Israelis, Jews, when we see a need, we jump on it. Okay, it's a part of our life. It's this survival instinct. Now imagine the first day you have 500 soldiers coming. So you understand, okay, it's not just that table with coffee. We cannot stay at just this table with coffee. So you add more food. Then another day passes, and you see more soldiers coming, and the guys don't have uniforms. The regular uniforms, before the tactical uniforms, before all this. And then a logistic guy from the army, see that I reach a lot of soldiers every day. So the guy literally dropped me 40 pairs of uniforms, 40 pairs of shoes, and tell me, if you give one to a soldier, you take the old one and I'll come and I'll change it for you. And then the next day, the IDF spokesperson, let's say, they started coming maybe 2 weeks into the war. I think that's how I met you. They started coming to the OTF with, celebrities, people from the States, people from, all governments, and they understood that Shuva can be a nice spot for them to have a coffee with them before they go into.
And you're not a government entity. You're not part of the government.
We're nothing.
You're not even like an organization at this point. You're not even a corporation. You're just brothers doing this out of your car and on the side of the road.
Exactly. And I'll tell you more than